the honourable member for Elizabeth had reserved the floor. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's always a pleasure to stand in this place to represent the great people of the constituency of Elizabeth. And I do so today as we discuss these two very, very important pieces of legislation. We have already paid condolences to the family of the late Sir Derwent Knowles, and I want to add my voice to that chorus. But, Mr. Speaker, no one who grasps the seriousness and complexity of the problems confronting this great nation could possibly celebrate as we make the necessary adjustments to our laws, or if we look at the resultant impact on personal liberty to assure the safety and the liberty of the public at large. You see, Mr. Speaker, we're in a very dark place, both nationally and internationally, where acts committed by the individual often threaten society as a whole. And this is now more the norm than the exception. Now, I had an opportunity to give a similar contribution in that other place in 2011. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to refer to some of the very same things that I said at that time, because we need to look at how we got here. We've come from a past when the rights of the individual in this country were threatened by a lot of prevailing biases, by prejudice, by racial and economic discrimination, by homophobia, by sexism, by religious persecution. And most of the progress that we have witnessed occurred because of the struggle of the many persons in this country who sought to right some of these wrongs. And yet, 45 years after independence, we are not much better off as a people, Mr. Speaker. Despite all of the blessings of this great country, we have squandered many of our gifts, and we have not achieved our national potential. We are experiencing a moment in our country's history where we are obliged to stop, to reflect, to take note, and to question all that we have thought to be right and true. Mr. Speaker, we must look critically and honestly at who we are and where we are so that we can reset our course, define where we want to go, and get there. We are here today to introduce and debate this government's legislative approach to corruption and crime in the Bahamas, and to offer what I believe to be a major part of the solution. We are here to play our role as legislators, as one part of the democratic team. There is no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that the people of Elizabeth and the people all over this country are deeply troubled by the seemingly insurmountable scourge of crime. It is chaos around us, Mr. Speaker. Lives of ordinary, innocent Bahamians have been changed because of the actions of a minority that have led to horrendous, horrible consequences for all. Yes, there have been economic challenges, and Bahamians have been laid off. Bahamians find it difficult to make ends meet. But notwithstanding the economic consequences of international and national events, many Bahamians have been victims of a mismanaged economy because of political appointments, inefficiency, and systemic corruption. You see, the old people say that the innocent suffer for the guilty. And so, 526 years after rediscovery, 45 years after independence, I am proud to be a Bahamian, to witness the wondrous things we have accomplished as a collection of individuals, as a people. Many have fought and sacrificed to get the Bahamas to where we are. The record will reflect, Mr. Speaker, that great Bahamians have contributed to this struggle on this side and that side of the political divide. Now, I will acknowledge that their side has done a considerable amount of the heavy lifting. But we, on this side, from the Free National Movement, have done most of the finished work. Over the last 45 years, because of our unwavering commitment to the principles of transparent, open governance, free of corruption and victimization, it is this FNM that has worked to build a nation where the aspirations of many Bahamians to live in a truly free and open society has begun to be realized. Contemporary Bahamian legislators who have been in this place before us have passed laws that sought to defend the rights of the individual, in large part because our history is pockmarked with discrimination, repression, and limited opportunity for the majority of Bahamians. But we have fought and we have clawed and struggled to celebrate and protect the value and worth of every single Bahamian. I am a member of this party, in large part because we not only speak about democracy, we actually work to create democracy and to improve on our national expression of this thing that can not be touched, but it can be felt. It is the guiding principle of any civil society-based country. And in this country, it is the battle cry and the mission statement of the Free National Movement. At one time, Mr. Speaker, it was an important guiding principle of the side opposite. But as I have said over and over in this place, they are no longer progressive. They are no longer liberal. But I must admit they do know how to throw a good party. So after independence, the rights and privileges of indigenous Bahamians framed our discussion. But with all things, the pendulum swung too far. And as we sought to preserve personal liberty and the rights of the individuals, there were simultaneous efforts to hijack our society from the dark side to achieve their own evil intentions. And unfortunately, their efforts were far too often unchecked by those of us who were elected and who should have been defending this fledgling democracy. One of the saddest things, Mr. Speaker, is that some of the most influential architects and builders of this nation have contributed to its decline by acts of omission and commission. And so, today, we are here because our country is unhealthy. It has been taken advantage of by opportunists who have seized this country that Bahamians have fought and sacrificed and died to secure. They have hijacked the essence of a free society, and they have diverted its power and impact for their own special interests. And as a result, we have seen the resurgence of a lot of ugly things like racism, narrow-mindedness, lies, disinformation, and all-for-meism. The pendulum has swung from an era of unacceptable but generally unspoken intolerance and discrimination to a new period of public posturing while practicing elitism, cronyism, and the worship of the almighty dollar. The current state is no better than the former. You see, Mr. Speaker, for the working class and the unemployed and the average Bahamian, things are almost as bad, if not worse, than they were in 1967. And against this backdrop, we have the erosion of the social fabric and an explosion of crime, violent, merciless crime. I reiterate my belief that we have ignored, forgotten, or never learned that with freedom and democracy comes responsibility. Responsibility demands a degree of professionalism and commitment to the greater good of the community and the persons who comprise it. For many reasons, we, that would be the country or society, have collectively considered and advanced the interests of the individual. But the individual in this country, having achieved access to self-advancement and wealth, has seemed to focus primarily, if not entirely, on self. And we have either passively or actively allowed our nation to sink into a cesspit of social ills. And we have seen this in government, in the professions, whether that's law, medicine, accounting, law enforcement, or business, in our churches, and generally throughout the country. Just look around, Mr. Speaker, and see the number of individuals that have progressed to a point of incredible wealth, but they have wreaked havoc on the community and the country that made it possible. As a people, we have become so isolated from each other and so focused on our own interests that we have become social pacifists who pay just a little bit of lip service to social action and volunteerism. You know the saying, I got mine, so brother, go for yourself. There's precious little consideration of or concern for the impact of our own actions on our community or on our fellow man. We have learned the art of self-gratification so well, but we have ignored the virtue of selflessness. In some ways, our flight from the inner city, our mass exodus to the gated suburbs, and isolation from our origins has made a mockery of the concept espoused by the late Sir Durwood, that concept of one Bahamas. And as our cities and neighborhoods have died, so too have been the dreams, or so too has died the dreams and aspirations of many of our brothers and sisters. And yet, as we look around as Bahamians, we have sought to blame any and everyone that we can, from the government, to the church, to the police, to the politicians. Any and everyone but ourselves. And so, Mr. Speaker, we are here today to debate bills that might have been called draconian. Just so you know, Draco was the first legislator of Athens in ancient Greece, and he replaced the prevailing system of laws by a written code that could only be enforced by a court. But these laws were so harsh that the code gave rise to this term draconian. And it is said that Draco's laws were written not in ink but in blood. So this group of bills, draconian as they are intended to improve the sense of well-being felt by the majority of Bahamians. And once passed, they will significantly curtail the freedom of a particular minority, that is the criminal. But they are a necessary response to the sad reality of life that has become the modern-day Bahamas. You see, Mr. Speaker, we hope to push the pendulum back in the opposite direction, where such laws will once again seem harsh and excessive. But make no bones about it, these are serious times. And this minister's administration has come up with a serious response. Mr. Speaker, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is a country which follows the rule of law, not the rules of lawyers. The comments have already started. These bills offend the Constitution. We got to watch out. They are too harsh. It's unreasonable to confiscate assets of someone who has not been proven guilty or who cannot be processed by the courts in a timely fashion, etc., etc., etc. But let's go back to our Constitution, at least to the preamble. This is so well known that I'll only focus on the first paragraph. Whereas 481 years ago, the rediscovery of this family of islands, rocks and keys, heralded the rebirth of the new world. And whereas the people of this family of islands, recognizing that the preservation of their freedom will be guaranteed by a national commitment to self-discipline, industry, loyalty, unity, and an abiding respect for Christian values and the rule of law.
I feel a shout come.
So, Mr. Speaker, let us briefly look at the relationship that's going to be challenged by these acts. And I wish to say from the outset that I expect that I'm going to step on a few toes along the way.
Mash them up.
So let us examine a few typical everyday Bahamian scenarios that don't require a degree in rocket science to understand how ill we have become as a country. Because we have no proof, or because the law says that people are innocent until proven guilty, and evidence is hard to come by, we watch as an ordinary fella. We knew him since he was just a boy. And even then, he was never the brightest light in the chandelier. He works at a regular job, or maybe he don't work at all. But, Mr. Speaker, he drives a luxury car.
Amen.
That someone making 10 times his salary cannot afford. And he lives in a multi-million-dollar home. Or he has a 60-foot yacht. Interestingly, his parents are not rich. He didn't inherit from his wealthy uncle. He didn't strike oil. He didn't get gold. But he's living large. Well, you know, some would say maybe he is an exceptional investor. But what about his 3 other colleagues who were just as dull as he was growing up? Did they all take the same online course and become miraculously wealthy? As Bahamians, we say that he should be given the benefit of the doubt. Leave him alone, because that's none of your business. You know, perhaps they would say that individuals should enjoy their fortunes in isolation. But Bill Cosby would say, come on, people. And Albert Einstein would say, if the facts don't fit the theory, change the facts. The presumption that one is innocent until proven guilty, which is a wonderful principle, a truth on which civil society is based. While this is a noble and romantic concept, it has provided a cover for all types of criminal activity. And persons in this country that I love and in which I live have exploited that premise to do all manner of evil, including raping, stealing, and even killing. The point is, Mr. Speaker, that perpetrators or criminals know that while they may be guilty, the system is too weak, too stressed, too slow, or too corrupt to prove it. And because the system is overburdened, it is easily and often manipulated by those who know how to play the system, especially when they got a good lawyer. The view on the street is that all that is needed is to get bail, because bail means freedom, as the case will probably never come to trial. Many Bahamians have an insulated or incomplete view of the reality of life in the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker. Some of us have no idea of how some of our people live or struggle to live. And many of us really don't care. A romantic view of what could, should, or might be is a very pleasant experience. And such a view would lead to an insistence on maintenance of the status quo or relentless, repetitive reliance on conventional historic approaches. So while we may have agreed that better 10 guilty men go free than to accuse or convict a single innocent man. It is difficult to accept this premise as a pure concept when innocent witnesses are being harassed, injured, or even killed. Mr. Speaker, I am in no way suggesting that we deviate from basic principles of natural justice. But we have to ask the question, how many innocent people should suffer? How many innocent witnesses should die, be injured, or placed in fear as we adhere rigidly to a legal principle that works quite well in most other societies, but which is exploited in a modern-day Bahamas? We have reached a point in our history where the rights of the few have been allowed to trample over the rights of the many. And the many, Mr. Speaker, and I don't know if this is unparliamentary, are pretty upset. I was going to say something else.
Preach, brother.
As bad as we perceive crime to be, and I can assure you that the general public's view of crime, violent crime that is, seriously underestimates the reality of life and the real degree of violence in this Bahamas. There's a generation growing up in this country who know nothing but violence. And if they continue to see violence and injustice and experience the abuse that they have seen, they will know nothing else, Mr. Speaker. So how will they grow up? We have spoken many times, and the Minister of National Security has addressed the matter of murders in this country. And while we need to desperately reduce the number of murders, a strategy that does nothing but reduce the number of our own who are massacred on the streets, while a good thing in itself, will not be sufficient to make Bahamians feel safe again. As Bahamians, we cry about the rising murder rate and call for someone to do something as the number climbs. We are focused on this number, but we ignore the many who have been so badly injured that they may have died, were it not for the grace of God and the various institutional and national services that stand in the gap. But most importantly, we ignore, negate, or minimize those serious crimes against the person or against others that create a fertile environment for the most extreme expression of anger, hatred, frustration, greed, and social and moral dysfunction. You see, these bills are addressing the fact that we have all made choices or ignored behavior that lead to crime, violence, and murder. We ignore the fact that the murder count is just the tip of the iceberg, and that murders happen because the moral fabric of our society has deteriorated over a period of many years. So yes, we express outrage at the carnage. We claim that the murder count is too high, and we say that somebody should do something, just as long as that something does not interfere with my hustle, with my habits, my money, or my behavior. Just as long as the state's response doesn't interfere with my rights to do what I please. And we wax poetic about how good things used to be, how great they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago when we were a peaceful Christian society. But daily we close our eyes to the many, many crimes and injustices that create an environment that nurtures violent crimes against the person and property. Whatever the number of murders, Mr. Speaker, the truth is that we now live in a society which has become lawless and which leads to a society where disputes happen often. And they occur in a setting where our people, having been so abused, are more likely to settle those disputes with bullets or knives. And so given the fact, the Bahamian reality, that crime and criminality has arisen from us and has been nurtured by the choices we have made or not made, coupled with unfettered access to guns and a rotting moral compass, there is no doubt that unless all of us, the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, the armed forces, the church, the family, and the individuals of this country work tirelessly and vigorously to do our duty, Mr. Speaker, the worst is yet to come. And so, Elizabeth is here to say that we can no longer afford to give corrupt and dishonest politicians, doctors, lawyers, pastors, businessmen, customs officers, civil servants, police officers, you name it, a free ride. This government, the Minnis administration, is committed to stamping out corruption and dishonesty wherever we find it, without fear or favor. We have allowed drug traffickers at all levels of our society to enjoy the status of neighborhood heroes. We speak fondly of the days when the only thing that kept our economy afloat was drug trafficking. Thank God for crack, we said, because cars were sold and houses were built and school fees were paid. Drugs and the proceeds of drug sales are all over our streets, in our homes and on our backs. But when the drug traffickers murder their rival suppliers or engage in gangland-style shootings, do we speak warmly of it then? We have refused to accept that our little crimes, the traffic violations, lying on our customs forms, receipt of stolen, counterfeit, or pirated goods and services, hiring of illegal immigrants, sexual misconduct or theft of time, supplies, or services from our job sites, could have contributed to the violence that we now see. Our children have not been raised in an environment where there is an absolute respect for the rule of law. We have stood back and watched so many things happen in this country, Mr. Speaker. And we ask, why is the murder count so high? Mr. Speaker, our judicial system is handicapped in the administration of justice. And while we must acknowledge the critical role played by the legislative and executive branches in equipping our courts and justices, they too must accept some responsibility for the state of affairs in this country. This problem has to be owned by every single Bahamian. I have spoken before about defense lawyers who have manipulated the system and exploited its weaknesses and lack of resources. But they cannot be allowed the common refrain that they must exploit any and every loophole or take advantage of the inadequacy of our courts without consequences. We must ask, is that behavior based purely on objective concern for the rights of the individual, their client, or the substantial fee that they get by winning at any cost, even if it means gaming or deliberately frustrating the system? And so, as I conclude, Mr. Speaker, I have painted a very grim picture of my beloved country. Unfortunately, it is not a view held solely by me. I and my party are inclined not to listen to the pundits. We are inclined to do what we feel is right for the people. And the people of this great country are crying out for justice. The majority has had enough, and they wish to see and feel a country which is safe enough to live in without the constant fear of crime and criminality. Every society gets the kind of criminal that it deserves. What is also true is that every community gets the kind of law enforcement it insists on. So while there has been a legacy of criminality in the Bahamas for more than 300 years, and that legacy has led to the modern-day culture of corruption and criminality, that culture has been nurtured and encouraged by all of us. We stand at a critical moment of our development. We can either acknowledge the seriousness of our problem, and we can take corrective, effective measures as being led by Killarney, or we can join the scrap heap of other nations who could not or would not make the difficult choices. Such efforts will need the concerted effort of all of us. I admit, Mr. Speaker, they are a bitter pill to swallow, but they offer real hope for an ailing nation and a troubled people. And Elizabeth is proud to lend our support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As many? The chair recognizes the honourable member for Tall Pines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of the good people of Tall Pines to add my contribution to this debate on the Financial Transactions Reporting Bill of 2018 and the Proceedings of Crime Bill of 2018. But, Mr. Speaker, before I speak to these bills, I wish to add with my colleagues Tall Pines' condolences to the family of Sir Derwent Knowles, a national hero. Mr. Speaker, my daughter wants to be an Olympian star like Sir Derwent, but I told her just the other day that she would have to settle for the gold medals of the big red machine in SAC. But I'm sure her day will come, and Sir Derwent is in fact a national gem and someone our nation should continue to be proud of. Speaker, I also wish to add my condolences to Elder Nuri and Navado Horton, Winton Doc Isaacs of Tall Pines. We want to say to their families we share in their sadness, and we wish them the very best. Finally, Mr. Speaker, there is a giant of a woman in Grand Bahama whom we have lost just yesterday in the person of Laurie Lady Miller. Grand Bahama, and indeed the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, will miss a giant, as I said, of a woman. I remember living in Grand Bahama, Mr. Speaker, the late Sir Albert Miller, her husband, was like our grandfather. And Lady Miller definitely shared her home and even her wealth, Mr. Speaker, with my family there. And I want to add my condolences and love to the family, the Miller family in Grand Bahama, and indeed the whole island of Grand Bahama, and indeed the Bahamas. Speaker, today is my mother's birthday, so I must wish her, must wish her, Miss Pastrone, happy birthday. She's a wonderful woman, and unlike a few days ago when I celebrated my birthday in this very house, Mr. Speaker, there was too much other excitement going on. I want to say that I would not ever want to forget her and the love she has shown to me. Mr. Speaker, these bills, the Financial Transaction Reporting Bill of 2018 repeals and replaces the Financial Transaction Reporting Bill of 2000 and all of its amendments. And while the Proceedings of Crime Act seeks to consolidate, strengthen, and modernize the provisions relating to preventative and investigative measures against money laundering, corruption, terrorism, and the like, I must say that these bills are in line with the Free National Movement's commitment we made to our people, Mr. Speaker, during the campaign and after, as we promised the Bahamian people that we will stand with them for a stronger Bahamas with no corruption in our civil service, no corruption within our political realm. And Mr. Speaker, the speech from the throne at page 18 reads, "My government will introduce legislation to allow the government to meet its international obligations with respect to financial regulations and supervision." It goes on to say that these measures seek to ensure the Bahamas' position as a premier financial service center. Speaker, I'm proud to stand on behalf of the people of Tall Pines to let them know that this government, this free national government, led by Dr. Minnis, we are standing up to our promises and we are delivering on what we've promised the people of Tall Pines and the people of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I wish to begin by speaking on the Financial Transaction Reporting Bill of 2018. Mr. Speaker, it's no secret that the Bahamas is one of the most, if not the most successful financial center in the Caribbean. It's no secret, Mr. Speaker, that the financial industry represents 15 to 17% of our GDP. And it's no secret that this industry has matured in the Bahamas. And just like our bodies, Mr. Speaker, when our bodies mature, we have to pay special attention to it. And likewise, this industry in the Bahamas needs attention. And every now and then, Mr. Speaker, as we live in an international community, we have to make various amendments or repeal these bills, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, these acts. Speaker, the Deputy Speaker and the member, and the Minister for Finance and member for East Grand Bahama noted as he led in the tabling of this important bill last week that the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force Mutual Evaluation Report of 2017 indicated gaps, Mr. Speaker, in the Bahamas' anti-money laundering, counter-financing terrorism, legal and regulatory regime. It was noted, Mr. Speaker, that while 7 provisions in the existing Financial Transaction Reporting Act were retained, numerous gaps were identified in 21 or 40 Financial Action Task Force standards. So, Mr. Speaker, this bill will seek to address these gaps. And I share the sentiments of the member for Cat Island when he talked about the fact that, I can use my own words, that these are very technical bills and we need more assistance, some of us, and really being able to address them in a timely fashion. And this is why, Mr. Speaker, I always speak to the need in this House for modernization, for assistance with members of Parliament in addressing these bills because of the significance of these bills to our economy, the significance of these bills to our families within our communities. Mr. Speaker, this bill goes so far as to addressing numerous recommendations, many of which was incorporated in the bill. Speaker, in order to modernize our legislation and policies relating to this important bill, it became important for this government to ensure that we introduce enhanced provision to the existing act, to enhance the powers of the Compliance Commission, to enhance financial institutions' risk assessment and internal controls obligations and oversights with their foreign branches and subsidiaries. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member for East Grand Bahama and Minister of Finance took us through the clauses of this bill and explained that which each clause seeks to achieve. So I will not go through each clause, but instead I would address what I feel are some of the more significant clauses. The Speaker, for starters, Clause 2 of the bill seeks to expand the list of now more than 40 definitions to ensure that stakeholders are given clear explanation of terms utilized in the provisions. Of importance, though, Mr. Speaker, is the clear definition given to identified risk, which includes corruption, cyber crimes, human trafficking, money laundering, proliferation of financing of weapons of mass destruction, terrorism financing, and it also speaks that that the minister would be able to address regulations as it relates to other risks. This is important, Mr. Speaker, because so many times we speak about the powers of ministers and being able to introduce regulations, but we have to remember, Mr. Speaker, that the financial industry, especially, there are so many changes every day in this industry. And our minister has to be able to be in a position to react to the dynamics of this financial institution, of this financial industry, where crimes are ever-changing and what we call these white-collar industries. It's also important, Mr. Speaker, to note that Clause 3 gives a definition to what is considered financial institutions. That really basically remains unchanged. But the list, I must say, Mr. Speaker, continues to include banks and trust companies, insurance companies, casinos, etc. And it is important, I say, to mention these two clauses because throughout the bill, there are references to these two clauses, and one must understand them in order to have a true appreciation for what the bill presents. Now, Mr. Speaker, this bill speaks continuously to an obligation of persons in the industries or those bodies that identify risk with their existing customers and new customers which will come into their businesses for services. And so customer due diligence requirements are, among other things, emphasized as measures that must be taken when, for example, there is doubt as to the adequacy of information given to those bodies. And so, Mr. Speaker, due diligence becomes centerpiece to this bill, as due diligence has become centerpiece to the financial industry in the Bahamas today, and indeed the world. Mr. Speaker, we talked a lot about how technical or difficult it is for Bahamians to do business here in the Bahamas in terms of banking when we compare it to the United States. But it's interesting that this bill, nonetheless, speaks at clause 7, subsection 4, which gives persons in this industry, identifies risks to be identified as it relates to low, we call them low risk. And right there, they're speaking, Mr. Speaker, about Bahamians with single source of incomes. And so I would say to our partners in the industry to be cognizant of this and to be cognizant of the concerns that Bahamians have in the industry as it relates to how their accounts and how their businesses are addressed in a timely fashion. Mr. Speaker, that isn't to say that I don't appreciate and we must not appreciate the dynamics of the industry. But it is one, I think, Mr. Speaker, that we have to pay special attention to if we are indeed to make the Bahamas a place which we call a place of doing ease of business. Mr. Speaker, I want to address, Mr. Speaker, a key element of this bill, which talks about the fact that even the directors and officers has an obligation to where they see or they ought to know that things are going in the wrong direction in terms of investigations, that they have an obligation. It speaks, Mr. Speaker, to the protection of employees and their obligation again to be able to identify these risks. And it protects them. And we say in the Bahamas, we call it in the industry whistleblowing. But it's good that this bill has provisions to protect persons who work in the industry. Because enforcement, you will see throughout this bill, is important. And in order to ensure that there's enforcement, this bill provides for the protection of what we might consider whistleblowers. And it places an obligation on persons in the industry to identify and to address swiftly anyone who goes against the regulations. And of course, Mr. Speaker, there are penalties that any breaches will have to deal with. And that includes, Mr. Speaker, prison entitlement of up to 5 years or fines up to $500,000. And I hear the member opposite asking us whether or not we should revisit those fines and keep them at the standards in the present act. But I think, Mr. Speaker, the intent is to ensure that the industry remains well regulated and people take serious the enforcement mechanisms and obligations under this bill. Mr. Speaker, I agree with Cat Island in saying that this particular bill is indeed transforming. I agree with him, Mr. Speaker, that yes, there are going to be need for us to look, maybe, and be careful and when we're drafting the regulations as it relates to certain aspects of this bill. But I want to end as I conclude on this particular bill that this bill is advantageous to the Bahamas in ensuring that we stay at the cutting edge in the financial services. And so I say to the member responsible for financial services and finance and all of the bodies involved in this particular industry that Tall Pines supports his efforts, and Tall Pines surely supports this bill. Mr. Speaker, the Proceedings of Crime bill. We hear over and over again about where this country has come from with respect to crime historically. And we, as Bahamians, Mr. Speaker, have to continuously remind ourselves, especially as legislators, of our obligation to ensure that we live in a safe and a decent community. And not only that, that others in the rest of the world will be able to see that we are committed to a society of justice, a society of where the rule of law is respected. Mr. Speaker, as the Deputy Speaker noted when he tabled this bill last week, the Proceedings of Crime bill addresses the concerns and recommendations made by the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force report of 2015. This bill also has the benefit of extensive consultation with relevant stakeholders. This bill repeals existing acts and subsidiary legislation as it relates to proceeds of crime, confiscated orders, and investigative searches for evidence of crime. It is interesting to note that one of the main features of this bill is the continuation of the Confiscated Asset Fund, which was established under the Proceeds of Crime Act of 2000, which, Mr. Speaker, seeks to receive and distribute property made available following orders made under the bill. The Confiscated Asset Committee, Mr. Speaker, is reestablished under the composition of the Minister of Finance as the chairperson, the Minister of National Security, the Attorney General, the Commissioner of Police, and such other persons designated by the Minister. Speaker, this bill also seeks to establish administrative bodies, namely the Ministerial Council and Identified Risk Framework Steering Committee. Speaker, what this does is shows the political will of this government to put emphasis on breaking crime even at the white-collar level and to keep us focused on our obligation to fighting crimes at every level. Speaker, we have the political will. This bill demonstrates that this party has the political will, and this identification steering committee, which is a technical committee made up of members of technical and legal officers, even from the central bank, from the police, from the AG's office. It shows that we want to put the right persons in place to do what is right to move our country forward. Speaker, of importance, and rightfully so, at Part 4 of the bill, which pertains to the conviction-based confiscation. And it speaks that any order made under this part shall be proven on the balance of probability, which is the lower standard for the burden of proof in civil proceedings as opposed to the criminal standard beyond reasonable doubt. Speaker, you would find that throughout this bill, when we talk about confiscation orders, there's this concern, I think the member opposite raised a concern as to, and I also, in reading the bills, had concerns as it relates to the standard, whether or not it will meet the criteria, the legal criteria as per our Constitution. Speaker, one could rightfully come to the conclusion that is an important consideration that we had. But I must say that having spoken to the minister responsible, the Attorney General, the Minister of State, and I've heard their explanations as to why and how these particular sections will relate to the bill and its importance. I'm satisfied, Mr. Speaker, that we will be able to address these issues if it becomes necessary and if and when it is challenged by individuals who feel as if actions of confiscation in any form goes against their constitutional rights or their legal rights, their basic legal rights. And so, Mr. Speaker, the bill pertaining to conviction-based confiscation is something that we really should look at very carefully. And there's two types of orders provided for in Section 4. In particular, the confiscation order, which is forfeiture of property to the government, which represents proceeds of crime or terrorist property, and the benefit recovery order, which requires the convicted to pay compensation to victims a sum equal to the benefit to the individual as a result of this conviction. And, Mr. Speaker, in reading my notes and research into this matter, I think it's good that this bill is able to address victims. And the victims to be able to be compensated who may be subject to some ill will as a result of persons who would have breached the laws as it relates to this act. Mr. Speaker, there's also the issue of the unexplained wealth order as captured in Part 7 of the bill. Mr. Speaker, again, this introduces a new concept to our judicial system of unexplained wealth. And many of us have spoken to this as it relates to politicians and how, for so many generations, we have seen our colleagues in this House, it's alleged, we've seen so many persons surrounded by politicians all of a sudden become millionaires without any explanation. But I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that this goes beyond politicians. I want to remind the Bahamas that this also goes to our chief civil servants, senior civil servants, and anyone who is not able to identify and to be able to show how they've been able to acquire their wealth. We've seen so many times, Mr. Speaker, in our little society where the average Bahamian look and say, wow, I've been to university for 8 years, for 10 years, and I've worked so hard. And this particular individual went in a particular place, in some cases, only 5 years, and they've been able to amass wealth without having to explain it. We are demonstrating in this bill that we are serious about addressing this issue. We are demonstrating in this bill, as we promised the Bahamian people, that we're not going to turn our eyes on corruption even in this honorable place. We're saying to the people of Tall Pines and the various constituencies throughout the Bahamas that we are more than talk. We are action. And yes, Mr. Speaker, we have seen that other countries, I see my colleagues spoke about Australia, spoke about Colombia, spoke about the UK, and how they have been able to incorporate this and use these in their acts. But I think that more than ever before, this is going to demonstrate to the Bahamian people our seriousness. And Mr. Speaker, you know, while I did speak about the issue with regards to per person's rights and their ability to challenge or be concerned about these confiscation orders, I was happy to see, Mr. Speaker, in Section 55, where there are some protection for persons. I was able to see, Mr. Speaker, and one could see in Section 57, where there's the right to appeal. And so I would just want to say, as it relates to these sections on confiscation orders, that as we continue to discuss these bills, that we remember that there is need, obviously, for more public education on at least this section, because there is going to be great concern in the Bahamian wider community, as it was even in this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, the enactment of the Proceedings of Crime Act will show this government's commitments to adhering to and upholding international standards and best practices in its fight against money laundering and terrorist financing Speaker, the Bahamas must continue to show our commitment to fighting against the abuse of the public funds, the abuse of our persons in our communities who think that they could get away with anything simply because of the office they hold. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that these two bills are bills that Tall Pines and all of our constituents in this House could be proud of. It's a demonstration, Mr. Speaker, to our commitment to nation building. It's a demonstration to our commitment to fighting crime. It's evident, Mr. Speaker, that we are moving in the right direction. It's evident, Mr. Speaker, that we are truly standing up and holding to our promise to the Bahamian people. Speaker, I end by saying that Tall Pines, we are proud to support both bills, and we look forward to a greater and more successful financial industry in the Bahamas and a more peaceful community as we put in place these two bills to fight crime, to protect our industries, and to build a better Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As many. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Angliston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the good people of Angliston, whom I'm truly indebted to, but more than indebted, inspired by in terms of their resilience, fidelity, uprightness in the face of tremendous challenges that many are facing. And I want to begin by acknowledging the late Bishop Forbes of Montel Heights, who was a bishop, retired bishop of the Church of God of Prophecy, who was buried last Saturday, and whose life was celebrated at a service of the East Street Cathedral, and I was there. He was formerly of the Montel Heights community, where he was a respected and beloved patriarch to so many, and who extended a patriarchal hand to many young people in the community, offering them guidance and love and patient counsel. And I've talked to many young people in the aftermath of his death who spoke so kindly of him and what he meant to them in that community. He was also, however, a revered pillar, senior pillar of the Church of God of Prophecy, and contributed greatly to the growth and development of the Church of God of Prophecy in the Bahamas. I believe he was born in Acklands and upheld all the traditional attributes that have come to be raised up for admiration in our country, the people of Acklands. I want to extend condolences to his blood family, who continue to reside in Montel Heights, his community family in the Montel Heights community, and the wider Church of God of Prophecy church family, because, Mr. Speaker, he was indeed a wonderful, wonderful Bahamian man. So, Mr. Speaker, the legislation we are debating today is evidence yet again of the global culture developing, stimulated mostly by industrial countries linked to their domestic realities and their domestic tax regimes, but also tied to the vexing global phenomena of terrorism and other nefarious trades which breed subcultures and can often lead to violence, loss of quality of life, and other serious social ills, even in our own country. As a sovereign people, which we are, very proud of that, July 10th, 1973, and we sit around the table of these various forums, fora, and which review and recommend and mandate standards and practices and protocols. I want to again say, and I've said it before in this House, that we must ensure always that our voices are heard, and as far as possible that we, little old us, progressively influence the decision-making in these policy-making bodies. Because after all, we are equally impacted, and sometimes we're even more so impacted. And in that regard, Mr. Speaker, I continue to be concerned, therefore, that it has been asserted. It was asserted when we were there, and I believe it's still asserted, I'm not sure. There's no clarity on it, that there is a foreign state that is or has been eavesdropping on the conversations of Bahamian citizens without the permission of this government or any government. And in our international cooperation, this is part of it, the legislation we bring today, we have to demand greater accountability and transparency in these matters, especially when we are dealing with our close allies. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate, we need to get answers on what is specifically happening with the assertion that a foreign government is, without the authority of the Bahamian people, listening or eavesdropping into the conversations and interactions and communications of Bahamians. And I say that, Mr. Speaker, because we must have an activated presence in the international arena, especially as it relates to our own interests. And the legislation we're talking about today is part of that activated. And we got to make sure that we're not just recipients, but we're active participants in the policy making. I was very interested to hear the member for North Abaco's contribution, which was very lively. And you know, he has a background as a preacher, and he's an excellent preacher. And you saw that articulation coming through in his presentation. And I noticed his concentrated emphasis on corruption and the apparent allusions, it seemed to me, to our own domestic circumstances. And I saw little hints about the previous administration. I saw the little hints there and there, making the distinction between this administration and the other one. And it is interesting to note that it was the corruption in the big countries. When we talk about corruption, I think you were fair. You said it's an international problem. But it was the corruption in the big countries and the failure of regulatory oversight in the big countries which led to the crash of the banking global network and which visited severe economic loss and harm in countries everywhere, including our own country, and out of which we continue to stagger. We're still trying to get out of it from that time. So the history of our corruption in our own country is an interesting one and goes back longer before the time of any of us in this house. All I can tell you is we've come a very long way from those primitive days in our country, the days of electoral corruption and intimidation by the then Bay Street Boys and the subsequent UBP government, and the numerous allegations of corruption and conflict of interest of members of parliament in that organization. That's the history of corruption. We have come a very long way in this country. And I actually went and did some research, and I saw some interesting things with Sir Stafford Sands, and you know, and I don't want to, when you look at the, so when we talk about, see, I noticed that when we talk about corruption, we try to paint a picture, and you know, it's interesting, Cleophas Adley spoke once, this is after the election 67, he was a member of the UBP, and he spoke about the new Bahamian being an uncouth Boer. And we have to be careful that we don't perpetuate stereotypes about people of color, and that you say that once they get power, that all of a sudden becomes a different story. We have to be careful. There's a history. It's continuous. We don't have to create some new paradigm of history. It exists, and let's be fair in it. We don't want to do an injustice to the struggles of our people. The commission, yes, that too. So I'm of the view, and this is my view, this whole thing about this uncouth Boer, and I'm not saying anyone here is saying that, but that perception that could be communicated. I'm very concerned that, it's my view, it's not appropriate that our Prime Minister, member for Kalani, globetrots or travels, and a few times been in the region, and insinuates, if not outrightly expresses to the world, that we are a corrupt people. And the strained analogy we heard in this house today of our country and Haiti on the issue of corruption, and we heard...
Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for North Abaco.
Mr. Speaker, I often travel with the Prime Minister, and I've never heard him say that. I've never heard the Prime Minister say that.
Say what?
That we are a corrupt people.
Right.
He never says that. What the Prime Minister says is that there is challenge with corruption internationally, and the Bahamas is no exception. This is what he asserts. Never.
Yeah. Well, you know, I would much prefer if he talks about other challenges which are very compelling in our country, and which lead to cooperation, for example, the trafficking of guns and all. This is the kind of thing I want my Prime Minister to talk about. Not to go on the heels of an election, having won an election, and declare this, this. No, withdraw, no. Mr. Speaker. Let me restate it, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for North Abaco. You want to restate, Honourable Member for?
Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Angerson.
Speaker, the Prime Minister of this beloved country has gone all over the world talking about corruption and his commitment to eradicating corruption. And he has, by implication, told the international community that that is an issue of high proportions in our country. That is my perception. Now, if he didn't mean that, then he'd have to clarify, because many Bahamians are of the view that that is what is being communicated. So if I'm correct in that, the Prime Minister should clarify, because that is my perception on that issue. But, Mr. Speaker, I heard the Prime Minister speak in Haiti about the mutual commitment of Haiti and the Bahamas to the issue of corruption, eradicating corruption in the respective countries. And so that led me to have a look at the Transparency International, which is what the member for North Abaco referred to earlier, and I believe I'm told that Exuma and Ragged Island did also. I was not here, and I think he was able to show that, quite apart from the perception and the coloring that's being sought to be painted of this country by the government, that and the Prime Minister, that the information that you rely on, Transparency International, does not support it. And, you know, in fact, the one I looked at in 2017, the Corruption Perceptions Index of 2017, the Bahamas was ranked at 28, and Haiti was ranked at 157. You have to be very careful, Mr. Speaker. To be very, very careful, Mr. Speaker. We're not comparing apples and oranges in these countries. And you got to be careful, because you might inadvertently, I know it has to be inadvertently, tarnishing the image of our country. You have to be very, very careful how you communicate when you go out there, particularly when you're talking about this country, Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I understand the very overriding compulsion of this government to ride the political horse into the dust. But we must not throw the baby away, our beautiful Bahama land, with the bathwater, Mr. Speaker. And as I've done before, I admonish this government again to be careful of this apparent slavish adherence to these international agencies. We see it with the IMF, and we go into the budget debate and we'll get to it, but we see that happening right now in this country with this government and the IMF. But the history of our country, Mr. Speaker, has been through successive governments before this one. This is the first one. To fight for the interests of the Bahamian people, not giving blind obeisance to international ratings agencies, which, by the way, these same ratings agencies that we so married to, by this government seems to be so intimately married to, while they were jealously monitoring what our little country was doing, failed to detect and or comment and or warn and or analyze the dangerous lack of oversight which led to the crash of the banking sector in America, which had a domino effect to almost every country on the planet. I'm Speaker, we have brains in our heads. We got to let these agencies know we can think. And that it comes back to my original point, Mr. Speaker. We have to seek to influence, as small as we are, because we're affected. We cannot just sit there and take directives or appear to take directives from agencies, external agencies, particularly when they had their own issues, their own historic credibility issues. There has to be a stronger representation of the interests of our people, Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, we agree with the MP for North Abaco that transparency is a critical component in anti-corruption protocols and actions. This applies to individuals, but it applies to governments equally. After all, every government is entrusted with public funds to be utilized and expended in a most transparent way. You had a whole campaign on that issue, and it became corruption. My concern in this regard is the manner in which Bahamian citizens have been released from employment with government agencies. We are told in excess of 2,500 people. Well, you want to tell me what the number is? Is it 3,000? What criteria is being applied in determining who would stay and who would be dumped unceremoniously on the unemployment line? Is it any, mini, miny, mo? We don't know. How are you determining who ain't gonna have a job no more, Mr. Speaker? We saw these terminations in tourism, the gaming board, and throughout the public service. Most recently, we see it at BAIC, where scores of Bahamians have been let go. One, we are told, was a permanent employee with 15 years employment. What is happening at BAIC? I note we have a change of leadership at BAIC. The former executive chairman, Michael MP, was moved as chair. I don't recall seeing an official announcement, but I could have missed it, or hearing some explanation, or I could have missed it. And so if I've missed it, I'm asking the minister responsible to assist us, the country, in understanding what has happened here. It seems that Michael has been replaced, as I've said, by the MP for Golden Gates, who was former chair of the Scholarship Loan Authority, a non-executive post, a post now apparently held by the Michael MP. Is the Loan Authority now an executive placement? And if it is, has there been any announcement? You might have had it, and I could have missed it. And does it have budgetary implications? In any event, I find the removal of Michael very peculiar. And it is interesting that the tenure of the Golden Gates MP has been immediately accompanied by mass firings of BAIC staff. In the interest of transparency, I believe the Bahamian people have the right to know what is going on at BAIC, Mr. Speaker. And I'm particularly interested, Mr. Speaker, that the discussion of corruption by this government as a political tool, them using it as a political tool, apparently applying to people associated with the PLP, who are Bahamians, okay? Who are Bahamians. Corruption, you know, we hear the implication, it's the former government, it was them, we heard it through the campaign, we heard it in here, we heard it in here today. Now, that same tool you've been using now for 9 months, okay, does not apply apparently to foreigners. Okay, Bahamians are uncouth, what do they call it? Uncouth boors. But the foreigner, no, I'm just saying, I'm just speaking figuratively. I don't call Bahamians uncouth boors. No, which are called, have been called. Okay. No, I'm not calling anyone, I'm making an analogy. I'm sure the Bahamian people are intelligent enough to see the analogy. Is it the Bahamians who are corrupt? But what about the foreigner now? The foreigner, okay? We saw in the recent case of the signing of the heads of agreement with Oban Energies, Inc., with all the chronic and continuous castigation of our Bahamian brothers and sisters in the Bahamas and impliedly outside of the Bahamas. Does this measurement not apply to the signing ambassador of Oban? We're talking about corruption now. Each day there's some new revelation of this individual who heads the ambassador. Accusations, convictions, admissions of fraud and organized fraud, misappropriation of investor funds, U.S. federal tax evasion, even accusations related to misappropriation of $8.7 million in a CLECO-related matter involving the Bahamas. In fact, it seems this ambassador, who sat in the cabinet office next to our prime minister, who so hates corruption, because he talks about it wherever he goes, and who signed the heads of agreement, has been barred by the U.S. Securities Commission from acting as a broker or investment advisor or otherwise associated with firms that sell securities. But he is now a primary investor in the Bahamas. So, Mr. Speaker, where is the heads of agreement, Speaker? It was promised that it would be laid last week.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for St. Anne's.
Will the honourable member confirm what I understood her to say, that she said this individual is a primary investor? Primary investor. That's what she said.
Okay.
If you stick by those words, no problem.
Well, I need to know. You would, as
No,
you.
no, Mr. Speaker. No, Mr. Speaker. She stated as a fact on her feet that this man is a primary investor. Does she stand by those words, or would she like to withdraw them?
I will say this. I'm not sure what the conundrum is of the Minister of Investments, because he really should be telling us what is happening, not telling me I better figure it out, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, let me say it like this.
But for Engelston
Speaker,
has put it on record that this man, whoever this man is a primary investor. Is that her personal knowledge? Because she was there before. I just want to make sure what she's saying. She may want to withdraw those comments.
I'm not sure what conundrum the Minister of Investments is seeking to unfold. Let me say this, Mr. Speaker, because I don't sit around the cabinet table. He does. And in fact, he's the Minister of Investments, so he should know better than even most of his cabinet colleagues on this issue, Speaker.
Yes.
So much, I'm not the Minister for Investments. It's the Prime Minister that is. And she should know that too.
Okay. Then now the Prime Minister has a portfolio. You told he didn't have a portfolio, but now he has a portfolio, Speaker.
And you know
Speaker, let me say it this way. Because I don't know if the heads of agreement were laid. Because let me just make this point, and I'll come back to your point. We were promised, right, that the heads of agreement would be laid last week. And it was not. Bear in mind, the announcement of this big deal now was so urgent that it preempted the debate of a no confidence in the Speaker. Either it was urgent, or it was intended to serve as a distraction for the pending debate. But as the old people say, be careful what you wish for, because there ensued more than a distraction, but an ugly spectacle of revelations. Now, the member for St. Anne's has asked me whether this individual is a primary investor, the ambassador. I don't know what he signed the heads of agreement. He signed the heads of agreement of this deal. He has a past. Should I repeat the past? Let me go back to let you know who signed this.
Honorable member, first.
Did she wish to withdraw her comment, her own comment, her own words, that this man is a primary investor? She is skirting round the issue. Either withdraw it, or I will ask her to expunge it. Because she has to, we've been down this road before. When she alleges a fact, she must prove it.
I am not allowing that. You do not come in here and do that.
Honorable member.
Come in here and do that.
You don't tell me.
Honorable member. Honorable member.
The member has objected. He should assert facts, not tell me that it's not correct. What is the position?
Honorable member.
What's the position?
Honorable member. Member for Angliston.
Yes.
Are you maintaining? Are you maintaining
Yes,
that
as far
the person is a primary investor? Are you maintaining that?
As far as I can see, this individual who signed the heads of agreement with the Bahamas government, ambassador, whatever he's called, has a primary role. Has a primary role with this company.
Honorable member.
Yeah, no, Speaker. No.
The phrase primary investor. Are you prepared to maintain that statement,
yes,
or would you like to withdraw it?
Speaker, I will withdraw that and say it this way. The man who signed the heads of agreement sitting next to the Prime Minister of our country, who later on, when it became controversial, went from being whatever he was then to being described as an ambassador. That person who apparently was trying to put distance between whatever his role is or was, we don't know. If the heads of agreement were laid, we'd have greater details as to what's happening. But you promised to lay it last week, you didn't lay it. You promised to lay it this week, you've not laid it, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, this individual who signed the heads of agreement of this deal with the government, who had sufficient authority to do that, has the history that I've just described, Mr. Speaker. And I am looking forward to the government not asking me to prove who he was, but for them to tell us who he is. All we know is he signed the heads of agreement with this government, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, and in that regard, Mr. Speaker, I'm asking the government to lay, I'm glad you got up St. Anne's, to lay all of the contracts of roadworks recently entered to by the Bahamas government with whoever in this Parliament. Let's lay all of the contracts the Ministry of Works have entered into in this Parliament. Speaker. No, I'm not. I'm not making no threat. I am asking the minister to lay the contracts. That's all. It's not a threat, Speaker. Speaker, we support efforts. No, no, I'm not yielding. No, I'm sorry, I'm not yielding.
No, I'm not asking you to yield.
What do you, it's a point of order?
I'm asking you to repeat what you said so I can...
No, I'm asking the, oh, sorry, okay. I'm asking the, in the interest of transparency, for the Minister of Works to lay all contracts recently entered into for road works in New Providence within the last 6 months. So, Speaker, I think the works have only just begun, to be honest with you. Speaker, we support efforts which result in international cooperation in our mutual efforts and interest in and to provide a safe world. We believe that our voices and intellect should be brought to all discussions in the interest of the Bahamian people. We do not support, however, Mr. Speaker, double talk and fake ideologies, and call upon this government to not just talk the talk, but to walk the walk. Okay? You want that heads of agreement. And I want to reiterate, when you come in here, you spend the whole day and you're talking about corruption. The whole day, Speaker. And so I ask the government, Mr. Speaker, to make clear what criteria is being applied in firing Bahamians from their places of employment, thereby depriving them of a livelihood. The concerns are heightened when we see the reported comments of the Minister of Tourism, and I've raised that in here before, Mr. Speaker. Danielle Gibson and Holly Pierce Barrett, Mr. Speaker. Holly Pierce Barrett, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, and the member, I think the minister who's not here, but he apparently in a news report, and I've raised this before, he's not objected, and he didn't challenge the newspaper, I don't think. In fact, I've laid this in the Parliament, Mr. Speaker. But he told the Tribune that the women did not have excellent job performance, and I don't think that is true. And then he said they overtly showed they were supporters of the opposition party while working for the government. And then when he claimed, then he said he didn't direct them to be fired, but the board of the airport authority directed it. But when the reporter spoke to the chairman of the board, he expressed surprise. And he said, I have absolutely nothing to say about that issue. I have no idea. So we want to know what happened to Holly Pierce Barrett and Danielle Gibson. Why can't they take care of their children today in this country? Why can't they? Can you tell us why those 2 airport managers were fired from Iniluthra? Can you tell us, please, Mr. Speaker? And I'm not going to rest, Mr. Speaker. We want to know why those 2 women, but there are 2 of many, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I have as many as you have. That's how it is in here. Equal members of the Parliament, Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we want to know. And we want to know, Mr. Speaker, what is happening at BAIC? What is happening at BAIC? Was there an announcement? I missed that. And it might have been one. I just missed it. But you changed heads, and I don't remember seeing it anywhere, Mr. Speaker. And why was Michael moved as executive chairman, Mr. Speaker? And, Mr. Speaker, no, that's not your business. That is our business. Your business, that's the business of the Bahamian people. And, Mr. Speaker, what is her status at the Scholarship and Loans Authority, Mr. Speaker? So, Mr. Speaker, the country does not want to hear a government who has no agenda, which this one clearly ain't got no agenda, Speaker. It seems, other than talking about yesterday, how corrupt this one is and how we do this to the economy and how we did all this and all that, the Bahamian people right now, they're not interested in that because that is why they changed the government, you know. They did not elect storytellers. They elected men and women who were elected to govern and advance the cause of the Bahamian people, Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, and they're demanding accountability, Mr. Speaker. They want their heads of agreement laid in this Parliament. And they want to understand how our Prime Minister could go to CARICOM and all over talking about his commitment to corruption, anti-corruption, and sit down and smile and shake hands and you know, and so happily exchange the goodwill of our country with someone who signed with him. Now, the member of St. Anne's says this, that, and the next, and whatever his role is, it's primary. It's very primary. And it's shifting as the controversy emerges. We would like to know, how do you line up the contradiction in talking about the Bahamian people and the contradiction you did with this foreign investor? Stop it, Speaker. I'm asking the Prime Minister to stop what he's doing in terms of how he is casting the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker. And the Transparency International, which was relied on by North Abaco, shows And I think Exuma illustrated that we're in fact getting better and better and ahead in the region. Stop it. We're good people. The Bahamians are good people, Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian people are demanding accountability and transparency, especially when Bahamians are being hurt, when they're losing the right to make a living, and especially when the patrimony of the Bahamian people is involved, as we see in East Grand Bahama. So, Mr. Speaker, as was indicated, we support the legislation, but we believe that there are some nuances that are involved in all of these types of pieces of legislation, and that we have to line up philosophically, fully, in terms of our engagement with the international community and the ratings agencies, and in terms of how the standards we set for our own people, that we do not vary from those standards and set apparently lower standards for persons who do not reside in our country and who navel string aim bury under the tree, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As many?
Before
Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Carmichael.
if I may seek the assistance of the Honourable Member for Angliston. Speaker, would be grateful if the Honourable Member who posed the question to me would advise whether there's a minimum that you would wish for me to deal with respect to these contracts that you would like me to raise. Is it $500,000, $1 million, 100,000? Is there a minimum figure that you would like me to deal with? Because the reason I'm asking that is there might be many contracts in 20,000, 30,000, etc. I'd like to know what the member, if there's a minimum figure the member would wish for me to deal with.
I think I'll put it this way, major road works. Okay?
100,000?
Well, I mean, you'd know major road works better than I would. You're the minister responsible.
Speaker, when I speak in the midterm budget,
Yes.
I will speak about many, many road contracts. Many.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many? The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Marathon.
Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I'm going to quote the good member from Centerville, crave your indulgence, to wish a very happy birthday to Horatio Butler, Winston Ramming, and Katrina Livingston, who celebrates her 93rd birthday today. Of course, happy birthday. And of course, I'd also like to extend condolences to the family of John Pickstock, Merle DaCosta, and Arlene Colley. May their souls rest in peace, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for this opportunity to contribute to this very important debate. And before I begin, I'm going to confine my comments to the proceeds of crime 2018. But before I begin, I would like to thank the good people of Marathon for the confidence that they have reposed in me. I am very, very grateful and humbled by their support and the opportunity that they have afforded in me and afforded to me to speak in this honorable House on their behalf, to reflect their values and their goals and aspirations. Thank you so much to my Marathon family. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to begin by quoting from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8, verses 36 to 38. For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Mr. Speaker, it's a very important verse. And it goes to the core of what we are discussing today when we talk about the proceeds of crime. What does it profit a man to engage in illicit activity at the detriment of his family and neighbor and ultimately his soul, Mr. Speaker? What does it profit a man to be named as wealthy at the expense of his eternal reward, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the huge profits made from crime often flaunted and give way to one of the sayings that crime pays, Mr. Speaker. This causes, in my view, deep offense to the hard-working Bahamians of this country and members of this community who try to do things the right way. Mr. Speaker, above all, the proceeds of crime provide the working capital for future criminal enterprise. Recovering the money and associated items was therefore and is an inherent part of crime reduction, Mr. Speaker. Overall, this bill seeks to do just that. Combat organized crime, money laundering, criminal gang activities, and crime in general, Mr. Speaker. Furthermore, the legislation solidifies the Prevention of Bribery Act and the Anti-Terrorism Act. Mr. Speaker, I heard my colleague from North Abaco say that in riding a big ship, you can't turn too sharp. I'm paraphrasing him. Mr. Speaker, the government, the country is a big ship. And we have been off course, Mr. Speaker. And this is why I am so proud of this government of which I'm a part, and my Prime Minister, for having the temerity to introduce the 28 Proceeds of Crime Bill to adopt measures to enable authorities to freeze, seize, and confiscate property that is the proceeds of or used in or intended or allocated to the use in the financing of terrorism, terrorist acts, or terrorist organizations. Like many countries around the world, Mr. Speaker, in an effort to quell these threats, the Bahamas government's Proceeds of Crime Bill is primarily aimed at stripping those involved in criminal activity of their ill-gotten gains, Mr. Speaker, and the property used in carrying out that activity. Mr. Speaker, legislation confiscating the proceeds of crime not only stops criminals from profiting from their nefarious activities and results in communities obtaining at least some of the financial benefit from the scourge of these criminal activities which they have to endure, Mr. Speaker. Together with the simplicity and perceived effectiveness of the criminal justice tool as a means of fighting serious crime, it makes the proliferation of confiscation legislation inevitable. In the current political climate, Mr. Speaker, there's a strong, very, very strong political incentive and appetite for robust confiscation legislation. Mr. Speaker, the Proceeds of Crime Bill seeks to make comprehensive provisions to the confiscation, forfeiture, and management of properties derived from unlawful activities. The question to be explored is, what are the objectives of this bill, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, if we seek to provide for an effective legal and institutional framework for the recovery and management of the proceeds of crime or benefits derived therefrom, then this bill addresses itself to that purpose. Mr. Speaker, if we hope to deprive a person of the proceeds of an unlawful activity, instrumentalities of an offense, and any other benefit derived from an offense committed within or outside the Bahamas, this bill addresses that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if we plan to prevent the reinvestment of proceeds of unlawful activity in the furtherance of criminal enterprise, this bill addresses that. Mr. Speaker, if we strive to harmonize and consolidate existing legislation, provisions on the recovery of proceeds of crime, then this bill addresses that as well, Mr. Speaker. If we aspire to make comprehensive provisions for the restraint, seizure, confiscation, and forfeiture of property derived from unlawful activities and any instrumentalities used or intended to be used in the commission of such unlawful activities, then this bill addresses that, Mr. Speaker. The Proceeds of Crime Bill is premised on a worldwide effort to combat organized crime. A primary target for this attack is the syndicates and their power base, and it's an attempt to destroy them. One must assault the money and assets of organized crime and criminal activity. There are many reasons to support this view. The goal of organized crime is money. The goal of corruption is money. North Abaco stated it very, very clear. The profits are tax tree, money generates power, and power influences the community. Mr. Speaker, this bill, if used correctly and implemented and enforced, will prevent persons from profiting from their criminal activities. Proceeds of crime legislation are intended to provide a four-pronged weapon in the war against organized and other serious crime. In sum, it is the permanent removal of the fruits of illegal endeavor and is likely to make crime far less appealing. Firstly, it aims to deprive a person of the financial benefits of engaging in crime. This deprivation is seen as an important aspect of punishment, leveled at those persons engaged in such criminal activity. One cannot argue against the fact that the legislation makes engaging in criminal activity an expensive hobby, as it confiscates or it contemplates the confiscation of both capital and income and tend to make it unprofitable. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, it seeks to deter reoffending by expunging the advantages of crime, adding to the second, or the polar opposite of the first saying, that crime doesn't pay. The widespread acceptance by governments around the world and within the Bahamas utilizes such laws as a means of deterring serious criminal activity, which may result in the derivation of large profits and the accumulation of significant assets, Mr. Speaker. Thirdly, confiscating the proceeds of crime is said to incapacitate criminal activity by targeting its economic base and eradicating the working capital available and necessary to finance further criminal activity. Finally, Mr. Speaker, through extensive information gathering provisions, this bill aims to assist law enforcement bodies trace the money trail and thereby the crime chain. The first thing to remember is that organization of crime is directed towards the accumulation of money and with it power. The possession of the power that flows from great wealth is, to some people, an important matter in and of itself, but this is secondary to the primary aim of accumulating money. Two conclusions flow from this fact. The first is that the most successful method of identifying and ultimately convicting major organized criminals is to follow their money trails. The second is that once you have identified and convicted them, you take away their money, and that is the money which is the product of the criminal activities itself. Mr. Speaker, these compelling justifications for the proceeds of crime legislation have resulted in many nations worldwide employing such crime-fighting legislative tools. Certainly, they reflect the stated underlying rationale for the introduction and continued refinement and development of proceeds of crime legislation in the Bahamas. Turning my attention now to the social benefits of the Proceeds of Crime Bill 2018. In addition to the much repeated punishment, deterrence, incapacitation, and enforcement-related policy outcomes, one cannot ignore the ancillary or secondary social benefits underlying the confiscation of the proceeds of crime. The importance of confiscation to the community's perception of and confidence in law enforcement agencies and strategies is an important benefit. The removal of prohibited goods from the streets, compensating society for the hardship and suffering that crime inflicts on both individuals and communities. And lastly, reimbursing society for the human and financial expense of fighting organized crime. Mr. Speaker, overall, serious and organized crime poses a significant threat to Bahamian communities. This government is committed, a minister-led government is committed to ensuring that our nation is safe and secure. And we are committed to taking tough steps to strike at the heart of organized crime and unexplained wealth. The law turns the table on the criminals who live off the benefits of their illegal activities at the expense of hard-working Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, we are committed to taking the tough steps to striking at the heart of organized crime, corruption, and unexplained wealth, and turn the tables on those who would wish to participate in such nefarious activities. Most Bahamians accept the idea that criminals should not be permitted to retain the proceeds of their criminal enterprises, and crime should not pay. Objectively, if crime did, then there would be no incentive for law-abiding citizens, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, significant and compelling social reasons beyond the financial services industry, but for the maintenance of the harmony of our country and our society, compels us to pass legislation to strengthen the moral fabric. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I want to say that we don't want our nation to be used for money laundering and criminal activities. That is not something that we want. But at the same time, by passing this legislation, we are also putting the world on notice that we do not, on the flip side of that, want to be used as the primary extrajudicial relief jurisdiction for nations around the world that fail to pass proceeds of crime of their own, proceeds of crime legislation of their own. In closing, Mr. Speaker, Marathon supports this bill.
As many? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to make my contribution on the financial transaction reporting bill for 2018 and the proceeds of the crime bill 2018. However, before I do, I want to thank Almighty God for bringing me once again safely to this honorable place. I am assured that no weapon formed against me shall prosper. It just won't work. God will do what he say he will do. Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank the wonderful and resilient people of my Cal constituency who have sent me here to be their voice in this honorable place. Mr. Speaker, I can assure the people of my Cal that I am speaking on a regular basis on their behalf. Yes, whenever I am contacted and know of any concern, I discuss it with the minister or those who I feel can assist in bringing relief. Mr. Speaker, I say to the people of my Cal, do not allow some people who are still crying about what happened on Wednesday, May the 10th, 2017, to discourage you. They would soon get over it. Mr. Speaker, I told the people of my Cal that I will work hard on their behalf, and that's exactly what I will do. With the help of Almighty God and the FNM government, under the leadership of the Honorable Dr. Hubert A. Minnis, Prime Minister we will make their lives much better than we met it. When the time comes and they feel that they no longer want me, I will say thank you and to God be the glory. But until then, let us work together and make Macau a better place to enjoy, live, and work. Mr. Speaker, I now turn my attention to the bills. Mr. Speaker, no bill that we bring to this honorable place will be perfect. And without some objections and scrutiny by those of the other side and some members of the public. However, sir, we have an obligation to do what we feel is right and what is best for our country to be brought in line with other progressive nations and for the generation to come. Mr. Speaker, I am convinced that this bill is most progressive. I have great faith in the professionals of this country, those who would serve on the Compliance Commission. They would make us proud. Not just the commission, sir, but all of our professionals are expected to do what is right and honest. The auditors must report suspicious transactions. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, while we want to open the doors to investors, etc., we must be careful and due diligence as it relates to those who seek to open accounts and do business in our country. This bill speaks to the same clause 20 of this bill, provides for the establishment of internal control, including training to combat activities related to identifying risk. Mr. Speaker, the bill also in clause 29 provides protection for persons making suspicious transaction reports from liability. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, this bill is not perfect, and the law is not perfect. That is why they can be amended when we feel that they no longer meet the needs of a progressive nation. Mr. Speaker, Jesus Christ, in my view, was master in amending laws. Matthew 5:21 and following, you have heard that was said by time of old time, but I say unto you that whosoever, in my own philosophical view, in these verses, he amended the laws of murder, anger, sexual infidelity, and divorce acts. Mr. Speaker, I now focus on the proceeds of the Crime Bill 2018. Someone said, the good is the enemy of the best. Most people can prioritize when faced with right or wrong issues. The challenge arises when we are faced with two good choices. Now, what should we do if both choices fall in the requirement, return, and reward of our work? Mr. Speaker, integrity is who we are when no one sees us. Furthermore, it's when one's action and words cannot be separated. Mr. Speaker, it is said that a president said to his staff, gentlemen, this year, the trick is honesty. From one side of the conference table, a vice president gasps, brilliant. Across the table, another VPM murdered. so risky. Mr. Speaker, in the world that we live in, honesty and integrity seems to be on the run because they are being chased away by many people. This bill seeks to consolidate, strengthen, modernize the provisions relating to prevention, prosecution, cross-border, corporation of money laundering, etc. Mr. Speaker, the truth, as we amend and create laws, there are persons who will seek to find ways to circumvent or invade these laws. But we have an obligation to do what is right. As I stated, no law that we make here is going to be perfect, but we must do the right thing. Mr. Speaker, we must continue to be a nation of law, but most importantly, a nation who enforces our law. Everyone must be judged by the law equally, even though their circumstances may be different. Mr. Speaker, those who commit offenses stated in the bill, corruption, cybercrime, human trafficking, money laundering, proliferation or terrorism, financing of weapons of mass destruction, etc., must be dealt with. I am happy that this bill mandated how persons are to be dealt with. Mr. Speaker, again I say, this is a progressive bill, and the Bahamas is being steered in the right direction under the leadership of the Honorable Hubert A. Minnis, Prime Minister. The truth is, all the people are not going to be pleased, but you must do the best you can for as many people as you can. Mr. Speaker, I have faith and confidence in the professionals in this country, and if each of us do our job, we will have a better nation, and they would watch us as we march on. Mr. Speaker, the bill outlines confiscation of properties, the procedure, the power of the court, the disposal of property, etc. Mr. Speaker, this bill speaks of how we are to deal with cash and property. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the unexplained wealth orders, Clause 75 and 82 of the bill, introduce the concept of unexplained wealth, orders which permits the court to inquire into the assets which have been acquired by relevant persons, but which are not explained by legitimate means. Mr. Speaker, the right of those persons who are accused are also protected, their right of appeal, etc. Mr. Speaker, this bill, in my view, is progressive, and it is just what the Bahamian people ordered. As I stated, no bill is perfect, but it's far better than what we have. Mr. Speaker, do nothing, fear nothing. If you have property or wealth and you cannot explain how you got them, the law must take its course. Mr. Speaker, it is my belief and conviction that anyone who needs to come into this honorable place must be of good character and integrity. I am convinced that all of us have to mention. For those who share the view that we do not, then many of them have themselves to fault because they voted for us and sent us here. We are a part of their communities. Mr. Speaker, it seems that our people must now start doing their investigations on candidates from various political parties and stop voting colors. Choose who you think is the best person. Mr. Speaker, there are some people who want the cake, the icing, and everything on it. They want to eat it and still expect to get a financial profit from it. Mr. Speaker, you cannot say that you want excellent representation. The best men and women the country has to offer. And then, on the other hand, you proclaim that they deserve nothing. If not now, Mr. Speaker, when? Mr. Speaker, this bill is to put people in check who only know what it is to keep a straight face and clean hands when people are watching them, or there are cameras all around. Mr. Speaker, all of us who came into this honorable house, this honorable place, must do what is right. And if we do not, then once again, the law must take its course. No one should be greater than the law. Mr. Speaker, this honorable member has nothing to fear. And by the grace of God, I will continue to be honest, maintain my integrity, and serve with a clean heart and clean hands.
These hands.
Mr. Speaker, Michael supports this bill. God bless you. God bless the wonderful people of the Michael constituency, and God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and make the wealth more common. Michael support these bills.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Seabreeze.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the wonderful people of the Seabreeze constituency in this honorable place to support. Thank you. Proceeds of crime bill and the financial transactions reporting bill and the compendium of bills that accompany them. Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by saying very briefly that crime simply does not pay. And crime prevention is everybody's business. A known and essential function of the law, Mr. Speaker, is to prevent, detect, and deter criminal activity and behavior. The creation and passing of this bill ensures that as the legislature, we introduce laws to carry out that function. One of the major problems that countries are facing today on both national and international levels.
Honorable member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Just a moment, please.
Seabreeze.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. One of the major problems that countries are facing today on both national and international levels is the organized criminal activity which threatens the economy and security of the country, and most certainly threatens the social fabric of societies. Mr. Speaker, the laundering of crime proceeds is closely related to other crimes such as corruption, financing of terrorism, trafficking of drugs and weapons, human smuggling, tax evasion, and the list goes on. Criminals try continuously to hide their illicit activities and to give them a lawful source so that they can continue these activities unabated. Mr. Speaker, confiscation is based on the principle that proceeds of crime should be forfeited, and persons convicted of crimes should not benefit from their criminal activity. Despite penalties that are set out in the penal code, the perception in many circles is that crime pays. Mr. Speaker, this myth must be dispelled. And this is where we begin. Crime does not pay. Just ask those sitting behind prison bars, away from their families. The unfortunate decision, Mr. Deputy Speaker, not only affects them, the reality is it affects the families, the children, husbands and wives, Mr. Speaker. Crime in the short term and in the long run simply does not pay. Mr. Speaker, the bill seeks to put practical measures in place to ensure that offenders and perpetrators of crime do not and should not profit from their criminal activity. Mr. Speaker, crime does not pay, and crime prevention, I say, is everybody's business. As commerce and trade have become increasingly dependent on advanced technologies, these technological advances, e-commerce, the global diversification of financial markets, and new financial products opens doors of opportunities for persons to hide, obscure, or launder their gains from illicit activities. Mr. Speaker, many criminal enterprises, similar to legitimate businesses, rely on these mechanisms to move funds swiftly and securely. The measures outlined in this bill, however, are particularly important when it comes to serious criminal offenses such as drug trafficking, organized crime, corruption, and the financing of terrorism. Mr. Speaker, it is important to point out that the tracking and confiscation of proceeds of crime can be extremely complicated in terms of its process and requires a lot of time, money, and specialized personnel to investigate and determine the origin, the value of the proceeds of crime, and the value of property which may be seized. We note, Mr. Speaker, and we do note that whenever we speak of confiscation, we acknowledge that the fundamental rights of an individual is involved, Article 15 particularly of the Constitution, and hence in the importance, this government acknowledges the importance of applying in these cases the law of natural justice, which encompasses due process, Mr. Speaker, for the protection of the innocent party and indeed protection of the government from liability. It is crucial, Mr. Speaker, the successful achievement, it is crucial, Mr. Speaker, that we acknowledge this as we ensure the successful achievement of the objectives set out in this bill. Mr. Speaker, this bill seeks to strengthen the preventative and investigative measures against the proceeds of criminal activities and the identification, recovery, and seizure of the proceeds of crime and connected matters. Mr. Speaker, this is serious business. And I like the fact that I must admit, the leader of the opposition had indicated very earlier, he described this bill as transformative. Mr. Speaker, it just reminds me that this government continues to stay focused on its agenda to bring change and transformation for the betterment of the people of the Bahamas. And I'm glad to hear the opposite side concedes to that fact. Mr. Speaker, and I just want to mention that was the leader, the other side, who said that. You know, when the leader leads, then the followers follow. But Mr. Speaker, the bill has implications for banks and other financial institutions who conduct business with the members of the public. It underscores the need for these institutions to do due diligence with regard to their customers and to constantly monitor and be aware of unusual activities, as well as the enforcement of and the observation of practices and procedures that are set out to police these institutions. Mr. Speaker, this bill seeks to provide for the necessary consolidation of the existing provisions on the recovery of proceeds of assets across our law enforcement agencies and create the institutional structure that will allow law enforcement to focus on their key role of investigation and arrest, and the Office of the Attorney General to have the evidence needed, Mr. Speaker, to achieve the ends of justice in their prosecutorial efforts. Mr. Speaker, it is my opinion that this bill will contribute to the maintenance of a sound social order by putting the measures in place to regulate activities that seek to disguise, cover, hide, and protect the acquisition of criminal proceeds. In keeping with our government's agenda, that is, the Free National Movement Administration, this new government of anti-corruption. Mr. Speaker, this bill is pivotal. It's transformative and it is pivotal. You will see change in the way people conduct themselves, in the way businesses conduct themselves, and how they relate to our people. Mr. Speaker, and this is important, and it ought to begin here. If not here, Mr. Speaker, then where? It will no doubt strengthen the preventative and investigative measures against the proceeds of criminal enterprises, albeit corruption, money laundering, trafficking of illegal weapons, human trafficking, and other related offenses. Mr. Speaker, the benefits of this bill can be enormous. It can be the tool in the fight against corruption as it seeks to deprive offenders of the proceeds of their criminal conduct, to deter the commission of further offenses, and to reduce the profits that might become available to fund further corrupt or criminal enterprises. Mr. Speaker, the fight against corruption, money laundering, economic and financial crimes call for a global collaboration. As a matter of fact, it called for a local collaboration. Mr. Speaker, we must be on one accord unequivocally when it comes to corruption and anti-corruption measures. There's no ifs, no ands, no buts about it, Mr. Speaker. When we consider our peculiar circumstances and inadequacies, the Bahamas stands to benefit tremendously from its relationship with the global community. Mr. Speaker, and it's very important that we continue to keep not only ourselves but our constituents in the entire Bahamas focused on what we are trying to achieve in introducing every bill that comes before this honorable House. It is to the end goal of ensuring that our people and our country is sound and safe, and that we are growing and developing as we should. Mr. Speaker, this bill will make the war against corruption meaningful, purposeful, and effective. Mr. Speaker, I support this bill, a preventative approach to order and justice. Colloquial phrase, Mr. Speaker, it reminds me of underscores. If you do the crime, you will spend the time, Mr. Speaker. And so I just want to make a short note with regard to the financial transaction reporting bill, Mr. Speaker, and say once again with regard to the proceeds of crime bill that it is transformative, as we all can agree here, and crime does not pay. Mr. Speaker, prevention is better than cure. Banking institutions are the leading repositories of the public savings, especially the savings of individuals and families, and that's what we are concerned about on the side of social services. Most of the savings are placed in short-term, highly liquid deposits. Mr. Speaker, this bill, the Financial Transactions Reporting Bill, seeks to address not only banks, but includes other financial institutions like insurance companies, trust companies, cooperative credit unions, and other entities providing services related to money transactions or transmissions. Mr. Speaker, the country, we must admit, was sick, and we needed the right prescription by a qualified doctor, and a pharmacy of integrity we need now to issue the medicine. Mr. Speaker, today, this bill only seeks to ensure that financial institutions operate with the integrity required to cultivate an environment of legal, sustainable, and healthy economic growth. Mr. Speaker, this is what leadership is all about, and we have in the member for Kalani a leader who is setting the pace to transform. Some of these institutions, Mr. Speaker, also hold large amounts of long-term savings and retirement accounts. The loss of these funds due to the failure of the institution or criminal activity would be catastrophic to many individuals and families. Mr. Speaker, we must consider what is at stake here if we do nothing in these circumstances. And so, Mr. Speaker, this is why this bill is so crucial at this time and in this place. The bill is a social safeguard, in my opinion. It is our duty, Mr. Speaker, as a government to ensure safeguards are there to secure the interests of our people. Mr. Speaker, who can fault us for that? We are simply here doing our very best to protect the Bahamian people. And this is why we were elected, to bring this type of transformative bill. Mr. Speaker, we must ensure Bahamian savings and their retirement funds are secured and they are protected from possible financial hardships through proper regulations and effective regulating. The bill before us today, Mr. Speaker, provides preventative measures which serves to protect people, strengthen the integrity of our valuable financial institutions. Mr. Speaker, this bill provides for the kind of supervision which subjects these institutions to certain requirements, restrictions, and guidelines. The main aim is to maintain the integrity of the financial system. No one, Mr. Speaker, is trying to kill institutions and businesses. Far from that. We are trying to keep them alive. Mr. Speaker, we are merely attempting to protect our people and put in place or institute the safeguards to secure the reputation of our financial sector. You see, Mr. Speaker, we must have leaders that think long term, not just today, but what will happen tomorrow, what will happen internationally, what will happen across borders. We must be looking further. We cannot just continue to create bills that only address the situation here. The world is global, Mr. Speaker, and that is what this bill is doing. It is important to maintain market confidence and confidence in the financial services sector. The global financial crisis of 2007 to 2009 suggests that financial regulations can have serious weaknesses, which includes lack of transparent oversight of the activities of the financial institutions. There's no such thing, in my mind, Mr. Speaker, as over-regulation, where we agree and know the policies are needed. They are important for the protection of our people and the protection of our good name and of our resources. Mr. Speaker, every day criminals are coming up with new schemes. Every day we can talk about loopholes that exist in the system. Mr. Speaker, we are here to never stop legislating until every loophole is closed and until every individual is protected. Mr. Speaker, this act forces financial institutions to be transparent and to be consistent in their reporting to the regulatory body. It's important for our financial sector to remain stable, and we must lead them in this regard. A stable financial services sector will promote positive economic growth. Inadequately regulated financial institutions, Mr. Speaker, can potentially undermine the possibility of economic growth and investor confidence. Mr. Speaker, as this government is poised and is taking the necessary steps to place the Bahamas on a better financial footing, this bill empowers the government to monitor financial activities and enforce actions. The regulatory agency charged with the responsibility of gathering and evaluating the information needed to sufficiently determine the risk or the riskiness of financial institutions in the Compliance Commission. Mr. Speaker, the regulations set out by the Commission must be balanced and also offer protection for financial institutions so that they can continue to develop new services to meet the demands of the public. So this is not only, again, trying to protect the people, but also businesses, and to secure their growth, sustainability, and development. As I close, Mr. Speaker, this bill seeks to make it an offense for financial institutions, however, as well as principals, including directors, officers, employees, for non-compliance of the regulations, to be held accountable. This way, Mr. Speaker, all parties are held to account and to take responsibility, their role, and their fiduciary duty very, very seriously. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian economy is strongly dependent upon tourism and international financial services, and that is why this is, within the first 9 months, top priority of this government. Mr. Speaker, We have years, Mr. Speaker, we have years and history behind us that we have to maintain, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that the Bahamas stays on the cutting edge. Mr. Speaker, in response to international concerns regarding illicit activities and weaknesses in the system, it is my view that the measures set out in this bill should serve to enhance the long-term attractiveness of the Bahamas as an international financial services center, which could only serve to place the country on stronger financial footing. Mr. Speaker, we must restore the image of this government. It has been tarnished to an extent, and we cannot deny that. And that is why I will add, indeed. And that is why I want to go a little back and piggyback a little on Michael and say, by the grace of God, this is why we are here, and we have been appointed in this particular time to do exactly what we're doing. Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage our government, the government of the Bahamas, and our leader and Prime Minister to stay focused on the agenda of transformation as was stated by the leader of the opposition. This is transformative. Don't stop. Don't stop. You know, and Mr. Speaker, as we restore and by this type of legislation, we will no doubt restore our economy. I am confident we will revitalize our communities, Mr. Speaker, and empower our people. Mr. Speaker, Seabreeze supports the Financial Transactions Reporting Bill and the Proceeds of Crime and the Proceeds of Crime Bill. Mr. Speaker, Seabreeze support.
Thank you. As many, Chair recognizes the member for Central Africa. Central and South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise, as always, on behalf of the good and industrious people of Central and South Africa, who I have the distinct privilege of working for. Mr. Deputy Speaker, at this time, I'd like to beg your leave to extend my sincere condolences to the family and loved ones of Sir Durward Knowles. Sir Durward was a man, a Bahamian, who was capable of transcending what many would call traditional societal lines or boundaries. And I think that is reflected in the widespread mourning and condolences offered by Bahamians throughout the length and breadth of this great country. As a matter of fact, as for myself, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when I think of what epitomizes Bahamian patriotism, his face among a small cadre of others is one that would appear. So I'd sincerely again like to offer my condolences and heartfelt wishes to all those who knew him and loved him. Mr. Deputy Speaker, looking to the issues of the day, we have spent the majority of today's affairs, my colleagues, thoroughly and studiously examining many different aspects of both of these pieces of legislation before us. So I hope you'll forgive me if I speak somewhat simplistically when I say, within my view, this is a matter, both pieces of legislation are a matter of credibility. Not only establishing credibility amongst the international community and those who may be desiring to direct foreign investment into this country, but also establishing credibility amongst our own citizenry. Mr. Speaker, I think I'm fair in saying that elected office is a sacrifice. But I also feel comfortable in saying that there may have been those in the past who have viewed their sacrifice as a justification to work around, above, or somehow otherwise circumvent the law. But sacrifice is not conditional. That's why it's called sacrifice. You give something up for passion and your own beliefs, not with the understanding or the expectation that there might be something else you can get out of what you're giving up. Mr. Speaker, There's been some rhetoric back and forth today, whether or not we are speaking down or otherwise downplaying our position abroad. Mr. Speaker, the key to solving any problem is acknowledging that one exists. There's room for improvement. There are issues that need to be addressed. And that is something that the Prime Minister of this great nation, the Honourable Member for Killarney and his government know very well. There are a lot of challenges ahead of us. These two pieces of legislation before us are a part of a wider agenda that we have been marching on with to address some very pertinent and outstanding economic issues. This is just two more pieces to that greater tapestry that is being wove to address the challenges of today. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if you'll once again allow me to take leave, that this is the forward progress, the steps that we keep speaking about, that we keep putting forward. We are doing it, we are living it, and these are the challenges that we need to face and accept, and we are addressing them head on. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to say that Central and South Abaco supports both of these bills here today, and I look forward to working with all of my colleagues as we bring greater pieces to this greater project. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. Central and South Abaco. As many. The chair recognizes the member for Bain and Grantstown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I mount this podium on behalf of the great people of Baines and Grantstown to impart my invaluable contribution.
Order. Bain and Grantstown. Order. The members speak.
To impart my invaluable contribution to the legislation being debated here in this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to give my full support to the Proceeds of Crime bill. I am proud to see that this administration move towards a high degree of accountability and transparency, and take in a more collaborative approach to governance, law enforcement, and the development of standards and practices on which governments and law enforcement are prededicated. This bill is part of a necessary and appropriate response to the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force 2017 assessment of anti-money laundering defense in the Bahamas. The assessment spoke to the need to implement resolution of the United Nations Security Council and has been recognized as the roadmap to the continued development of the Bahamas' response to money laundering. In combination with the adjustments being made to the Central Bank of the Bahamas, the Proceeds of Crime bill shows this government's commitment to strengthening anti-money laundering mechanisms. Mr. Speaker, one of the principles of democracy, and an essential one, is the rule of law. Authority and positions are not to protect individuals from the law, and the people of a nation depend on the rule of law to ensure that political power does not lead to corruption. We, Mr. Speaker, in this honorable place, have the responsibility of upholding the basic principles of democracy which allow it to function. This includes the duty to ensure equality before the law, and that we ourselves are bound and ruled by the law. The law then must apply in equal measure to the rich and to the poor. and the supporters of any political party. No one, Mr. Speaker, within these walls or any constituency or area, not, Mr. Speaker, if I may hasten to say, Kalani or Freetown or Bean and Grantstown, is above the law. Mr. Speaker, the Proceeds of Crime Bill applies to one and all. It does not discriminate, nor does it exclude. It reaches far and wide, giving consideration to various forms of money laundering and involvement in illegal activity, with sections specific to concealing, acquisition, failure to disclose, and tipping off. This bill equips law enforcement and members of the judicial system with tools to respond to all involved in money laundering activity, including those in authority who, having access to inside information, giving warning to known criminals. On concealing, the bill encompasses acts of disguise, conversion, transfer, and removal of proceeds of crime. It goes further to define the concealment and disguise, speaking specifically to its source, location, disposition, movement, and ownership. The Proceeds of Crime Bill, Mr. Speaker, does not make excuse for ignorance. It demands accountability, whether or not a person knowingly commits an offense when it is determined that he ought to reasonably have known or suspected that he was involved in activities with the proceeds of crime. Mr. Speaker, not only does that strengthen prosecution, but it holds people, especially professionals, accountable. Mr. Speaker, this includes individuals and firms involved in accounting, taxation advice, and legal services. And if it is determined that such a practitioner knows or should have known a client to be engaging in money laundering, or this information comes to the practitioner during the course of business, a disclosure must be made. Mr. Speaker, this bill is strengthened by the built-in of cross-ministry coordination. Critical to this bill is the establishment of the Identified Risk Framework Steering Committee, or the IRF Steering Committee, with representation from Customs and Immigration's Department, Ministries of Foreign Affairs, Finance, Financial Services, and critically, the role of the Royal Bahamas Police Force and the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. All of these bodies are responsible for regulation of financial institutions, thus having specific expertise and its specific insight and access necessary to the duties of the committee. Mr. Speaker, penalties are as important as the recognition of crime itself, and an attempt to curb criminal activity must involve a deterrent. The penalties in the Proceeds of Crime Bill, capped at a $500,000 fine and or 20 years in prison on conviction. A fine can, in fact, be coupled with time in prison. Mr. Speaker, I hasten to add that this is certainly no slap on the wrist. In addition, the bill allows for restraint. When under investigation, charged or convicted of a proceed of crime offense, application can be made to the Justice of Supreme Court for the restraint of property. Such an application must be made with the support of an affidavit by an authorized person, stating the reason that that person has to believe that the person in question has benefited from an offense and the property is related to that offense. This allowance can prevent people under investigation, charged, or convicted under the proceeds of crime from continuing to benefit from the property deemed to be the proceeds of crime. Following the passing of this bill, Mr. Speaker, it is critical that the IRF Steering Committee coordinates a national risk assessment periodically, ensuring that those periods are not synonymous with the 5-year terms of government, Mr. Speaker. These assessments must be regular, as they undoubtedly will form the foundation of the work to be done, from the development of risk identifying mechanisms to the establishment of national policies. These components are dependent on and must be responsive to information obtained through periodic assessments, Mr. Speaker. This administration committed itself to addressing crime issues in the Bahamas. We spoke to the enforcement of zero-tolerance approach to crime, Mr. Speaker. This was and is not limited to theft or gun violence. The Proceeds of Crime bill before us today, Mr. Speaker, is evidence of the commitment to curbing all crime, Mr. Speaker, and that we will not ignore or excuse white-collar crime. The people of Baines and Grantstown, Mr. Speaker, is concerned about all forms of crime, as they are all affected by it, Mr. Speaker. They want to see us take action in response to the backdoor deals, discriminatory practices, and creation of maintenance of structures that exclude them while privileging others. Mr. Speaker, this is a step in the right direction, showing members of the Baines and Grantstown community that we are serious about discouraging, decreasing, and persecuting all forms of crime, Mr. Speaker. The hard-working people of Baines and Grantstown, along with, I'm certain, all Bahamians, are ready for a crime-free nation. Mr. Speaker, they are not concerned only with the statistics report in the daily newspaper and the national news updates. They consider the experiences they have and challenges they face on a daily basis in a country where certain types of crime can be both insidious and blatant, Mr. Speaker, and only punishable when involving a particular demographic. Mr. Speaker, the rule of law is critical to democracy. We are all equal, subject to the same laws, Mr. Speaker, and it is time that the law reflects that by directly addressing crimes especially overlooked or missed because they are committed by the rich, the networked, or almost invisible. Mr. Speaker, one of the primary commitments made by this administration before and after election is to the trio of transparency, accountability, and corruption. We committed, Mr. Speaker, as all governments should, to taking responsibility for our individuals and collective actions, and being able to properly explain and justify them to the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, we are expected to be honest and clear, not only in our communication, but also in our operations. Public accountability is key, Mr. Speaker, to maintaining the trust of the Bahamian people. We must be mindful of the expectations of the people and committed, and the commitments we made to them, Mr. Speaker. The Proceeds of Crime bill helps to fulfill, at least in part, a promise to the Bahamian people. It behoves us to act with integrity, Mr. Speaker, and it is evidence of our determination to prevent and respond to all forms of crime by all people. It will make for and respond to all forms of crime. It will make for the strong democracy through the principles of the rule of law. Mr. Speaker, I thank you. Members of this honorable House, I thank you for your indulgence. Baines and Grantstown supports this bill.
Thank you, Baines and Grantstown. As many Just 1 second, Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, we are a transparent government. And last week, we promised that the heads of agreement would be tabled. And at the end of my presentation, the heads will be tabled.
Not like we knew.
My presentation is brief.
We don't miss no promise.
But
We don't miss no promise.
with the, what was that promise? No, last week I promised I'll lay it next week. You're forgetting. You're getting old. Ask Travis. He can say it. But, Mr. Speaker, we commence the mid-year budget next week. During the mid-year budget, I intend to address some matters with respect to OBAN, matters that both members will be very, very cognizant of. Their names appear very prominent in the documents and their opinions, and they would also know that this head is not much different from what you had sent to the AG's office on the 23rd of March of last year. Mr. Speaker, I said that I will address those matters next week, and you will see what you had said. But Mr. Speaker, before I start, I want to extend condolence to the family of Sir Dermot Knowles, who is a true national hero, philanthropist, who had made great contribution to our society. And even upon his death, his family continued to make great contribution. But I rise, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the wonderful people of Kalani, whom I have the privilege of serving here in this great parliament. And I rise in support of the proceeds of the Crime Bill 2018, which my government had promised to introduce as a part of our compendium of anti-corruption legislation. But I note that we have already passed legislation to provide for the standalone Office of the Public Prosecution. And the creation, Mr. Speaker, of an independent Office of Public Prosecution will help to enhance the rule of law by removing the unnecessary influence of political figures. And we also propose to introduce an integrity bill. But, Mr. Speaker, before that bill is introduced here in this Parliament, I understand that there are questions about elements of that bill which will have to be properly reviewed in order to improve the legislation when necessary. But the proceeds of Crime Bill 2018 seeks to consolidate, strengthen, and modernize the provisions relating to prevention, prosecution, and cross-border cooperation of money laundering, terrorism financing, corruption, human trafficking, and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Mr. Speaker, I have traveled the length and breadth of this Bahamas. Tomorrow I travel to Exuma. And throughout my travels here in Bahamas, the question is always asked, amazing while in Haiti, I remembered, But the question is always asked, what are the three most pertinent issues that affects our country, Bahamas? And Mr. Speaker, I am saddened to say that number one is corruption, number two is corruption, and number three is corruption. Three most pertinent issues. This legislation has strong measures relating to the recovery of the proceeds and instrumentalities of crime, including providing for civil forfeiture of the proceeds of criminal conduct and illicit cash, and to introduce powers relating to unexplained wealth, investigative orders, the confiscated asset funds, and the confiscated assets committee. Mr. Speaker, it's not unusual that you drive about our island and you encounter much unexplained wealth, where individuals you know for a fact are paid $32,000, $33,000 per year. Have kids in private schools that may cost $4,000 or $5,000 per year. Drive Mercedes-Benz that you know may cost about $80,000. Has Lexus and big trucks, what do you call those? F-150 on $32,000. And the homes are $1.5 million. But yet, this is all done on $32,000. So one must explain and wonder, what are they doing that the rest of us are not? And this is a part of corruption, Mr. Speaker. And what this bill would allow us to do is to confiscate those ill-gained wealth and return it to the public where it belongs. Because, Mr. Speaker, corruption breeds poverty and income inequality. Monies that could have been used to lift individuals out of poverty, monies that could have been used for our health care system, monies could have been used for our educational system, our national security, and for social services, or for building homes for our populace. But through greed, individuals have diverted such money to enriching themselves. And if we as a nation want to continue to progress and move forward, then our first issue can no longer be corruption. Our second issue can no longer be corruption, nor our third issue, corruption. But we must deal with the problems that we face and try our best to eradicate poverty, increase our middle class, and uplift our people. This legislation, Mr. Speaker, is in keeping with international good practices in jurisdictions around the world. Because of various threats to national security, my government is committed to modernizing and reforming legislation that will help to combat these serious threats. We are devising a broad range of measures as a part of a modern anti-corruption regime. We are doing so in cooperation with other governments and international bodies. And our anti-corruption measures are intended to combat domestic corruption, as well as to prevent foreign individuals and organizations who seek to use the Bahamas for nefarious purposes. These threats, Mr. Speaker, include criminal gangs, drug traffickers, cyber threats, and other threats. And we must protect our borders, banking systems, and communication systems from criminal networks by, among other measures, targeting the proceeds of crime. Even as the government seeks to target the nefarious acts of international and domestic criminals using various technologies, we are committed to addressing official corruption. Mr. Speaker, I wish to once again address the House on certain matters relating to corruption. Let me start by strongly rejecting the false equivalence or notion by some that there is no difference between the FNM and the PLP. There are clear differences, Mr. Speaker. There are clear differences, which some who should know better are conveniently forgetting. The massive corruption of the last 5 years was a shameful national disgrace.
Yes. Let the leaders start.
Mr. Speaker, which should never, ever be allowed.
A point of order.
Again.
Honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member. Your place is this place. Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Speaker, it's unbecoming of the Prime Minister.
Honorable member, you're on a point of order?
Yes.
State,
Point of order is
state different infringement.
That the member speaks of massive corruption in the last 5 years. Right. And I think, without specifying it, there are two things. One, if he's talking about anything related to matters before the court,
It shouldn't be.
it shouldn't be. He should not be speaking about
The
that.
rules don't allow it.
The rules don't allow it. And if he's talking about massive, he needs to speak to that. He needs to bring the proof.
Or withdraw it.
Or withdraw it, as you keep continuing to remind us.
Yes, you always remind us, Mr. Speaker.
You have matters before the court. Right? That ought not to be that ought not to be discussed or mentioned in these proceedings. Secondly, as you point out, if he makes a statement that he cannot prove or intend to prove, he ought to withdraw it.
Mr. Speaker, I think the member will be very surprised. There are different forms of corruption. To start off with, I didn't specifically state with that. But let's just mention one, and let the Bahamian people determine whether this is a form of corruption. If you, well, first of all the no bid contracts, we won't go down that road yet. But hold on. But let the Bahamian people decide this. The standard procedure in any contract issuance, standard procedure, the contract is given for 3, 4 years, sometimes 5, and there's an out clause, usually 30 days. I asked the Bahamian people if they would think this is a corrupt intent if a contract is given for life. A lifetime contract. And no out. A lifetime yeah, I'm going to bring that contract when we do lifetime. A lifetime contract. I'm going to bring that contract when we do the midterm budget. In addition to that, it states within the contract that if for any reason we try to get out of it, then we must give a 3-year notice. 3-year notice. Now, I'm hoping that case is taken to court. I'm hoping that it's in the court. Let me explain why. Let me explain why. No. It doesn't reach. It doesn't reach. No.
Go ahead and prejudice it. Go ahead.
All right. No.
I want to understand what you're saying.
You're going to get that, but I don't think you should talk too soon, you know, because next week we're going to table the water and sewage. We're going to table that report. So don't talk too soon. Don't talk too soon.
Honorable members, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Yes, Mr. I'm happy that he mentioned that the Water and Sewage Corporation report is going to be laid next week. All right. I like the minister. I like you to know that I was advised this morning that I'm named somehow in that. I know nothing about it, right? But I don't. No one is doing me any favor to say to me that my name may appear in a report that's being written. I don't know whether it's adverse to me or not, but what I can say on the record that no one has spoken to me about anything in relation to Water and Sewage Corporation. And I would have thought that it will be totally unfair for any report to be written about me without speaking to me about it. But I'll wait it. I'll wait it. But Mr. Speaker, I just want to know, you're saying that a lifetime contract was issued.
I'm going to bring, listen.
No, Mr. Speaker, but you were giving particulars.
Hold on.
You were,
hold on.
Honorable members.
I've got 18 minutes on the floor. But my aides are listening to me. Go up to my office. The tray on the right.
I better keep quiet.
There's a brown envelope like this, shorter. Kindly bring it for me. Kindly bring it. If they get it here, you'll receive it today. If not, you'll receive it next week. But Mr. Speaker,
I better sit down and keep quiet.
There were all manner.
Honorable member for Angleston.
Speaker, the member.
State the infringement.
The member made an assertion that the last administration engaged in what he called massive corruption, Mr. Speaker. Massive corruption, Mr. Speaker. And when challenged just now, the member for Kalani, who he is Prime Minister, but he's equal member in this House, subject to the rules, appointed to something which is not before the House, but we may have let that go. He says he's going to send for it about a lifetime contract. But I want to know how that instance that he referred to, which he's not yet established, amounts or equates to what he described as massive corruption, Mr. Speaker. Massive, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I could, I don't know if the member wants me to look up the meaning of massive. And he gave one instance of something, Speaker. I'm inviting the member. I'm inviting the member, Speaker, the member to be fair in this House. If he's not able, who say road traffic? Not the minister. No. Not the minister. No. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member.
Speaker, I will speak to road traffic, because the facts now disclose the propaganda of this administration when they were on the campaign trail. But I am grateful for the opportunity. So we can get to that. Mr. Speaker. The point of order, Speaker, is I am asking the member to withdraw his unsubstantiated assertion. And if he doesn't withdraw, Mr. Speaker, you can expunge it if he refuses. And I'm asking if he refuses that you expunge it, because he has not established before this House any evidence of what he describes as massive corruption by the former administration, Mr. Speaker.
Problems with massive. Let's just move massive and leave corruption. But more to come. There are more reports, all right? And those reports are going to be tabled here. And I think the Bahamian public is going to be, they will be very, very impressed. Mr. Speaker, there were all manners of conflicts of interest, such as, now listen so you could pop up again, such as a PLP government minister openly and boldly begging for money and contracts from a resort developer.
Come up now.
Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Cat Island, Rumpkins and Salvador. Point of order.
Unless the member is going to establish what he's saying. All right? It is not. Which minister beg for any money from any hotel investor? What? No, but you got to say some of those things out there and said under the cloak of privilege, Mr. Speaker.
So,
Discussions with potential investors, Mr. Speaker. I have listened to stories and reports of investors staying from the Bahamas because they feared of being asked for a so-called incentive to do business in the Bahamas. But Mr. Speaker, listen, when I table those documents, you won't be like a popcorn anymore. You're going to stay still.
Yeah, definitely.
This is a new...
Speaker,
the Honourable Member for Angleston,
are
you on a point of order?
Point of order, Speaker. But the member just described... Yes, the member just referred to me in a most demeaning way. That is not permitted under the rules, Mr. Speaker. When a member takes a point of order, even if she is from Angleston or she's a woman or whatever the issue is, she is entitled to take points of order. It's not popcorn. And the member, I want to invite the member to be respectful to other members of this House, equal members under this House exercising their rights under the rules of this House, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'm asking the member to do the right thing and to be honorable. I'm asking the member to be honorable and to withdraw those demeaning remarks that he just describing me as taking a point of order as being what he calls popcorn is very disrespectful, Mr. Speaker. Very disrespectful. And I'm not going to tolerate, Mr. Speaker. I'm asking the member for Kalani to withdraw his demeaning reference to the member for Angleston, please.
I'll make you feel bad. All right. I withdraw. Sit down. Mr. Speaker, this is a new day for the Bahamas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Official corruption retards and hinders national development. Mr. Speaker, it's interesting. I want to quote something from a former member of that side, who, and I quote, who insisted that the granting of government's contracts to political supporters will never stop. Never stop. Because politicians must do what they have to do to win elections. But I'll deal with that another time. Speaker, allow me to continue. I now have a few minutes. Official corruption retards and hinders national development. Such corruption hinders our progress as a country. Investments by domestic and foreign investors will be decided by merit under this administration. We are already attracting new investments and interests because we are distinctly different from the former administration. We are different from you. Lest we quickly forget, the former administration gave billions of dollars of untendered contracts, including roadworks and other projects in Andros. You want a point of order? on the watch of the former Minister of Works and the current leader of the opposition, a number of individuals were granted construction contracts at BAMSI despite not meeting certain requirements.
Honorable Member for Cat Island, Rumpkin, San Salvador.
The member for Kalani, right, is now suggesting that I would have done something that was not in keeping under my watch. Right. Mr. Speaker, because I wish for him to identify it, because there's nothing wrong per se in awarding contracts without going to tender. They have done it, and they're doing it today.
They just did it?
They're still doing it. They just did it.
Time, every little minute.
Right? That's why I had to ask the question the other night whether a particular contract was corrupt. I only asked the question. Right? The untendered contract and contracts given in Grand Bahama as well. I just asked the questions. I didn't say they were. I asked the questions. Because if that's the way they want to paint it, then they have to adopt and answer it the same way. That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
So there's nothing inherently wrong in the awards of contracts without a tender. Right? There's nothing wrong with it. It's once the best practices were awarded in doing so. And the minister does not award contracts without having his proper advices from his technical people.
Mr. Speaker, when the Auditor General raised serious questions about the finances of urban renewals and small home repairs programs, certain government officials were not forthcoming. The Public Accounts Committee of the House of Assembly had great trouble getting its work done because of this lack of accountability. The United States State Department issued a troubling report on the bidding and procurement contracts under the former government. The report noted undue government interference, end quote, in the bidding of the procurement process, noting that the process is, quote, particularly problematic, and passed further than earlier reports that there has not been a sustained effort to ensure the opportunities for abuse of the system are minimized. Daily went on, reported at that time, diverging from positions taken in earlier investment climate reports. The document states that the United States government has received a number of reports on impropriety in recent times surrounding the issuance of contracts by the government. The report continued. Over the last year, the embassy here in Nassau has received several complaints from U.S. companies alleging a lack of transparency and undue government interference with bidding and procurement processes. Under this government, we are improving the investment climate for Bahamians and foreign investors.
The report from a foreign government and whether he adopts that as his own for the proceedings in this parliament, and all of the things said in that report by the United States about the Bahamas and the Bahamas government, whether this Prime Minister accepts and adopts the contents, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, just for clarity on the rules,
Yes.
because what seems to be being asserted is not consistent with my interpretation of Rule 33(1) on page 26. It says this: every member desiring to speak shall rise and address the chair. A member may read extracts from books, journals, papers, and documents,
Right.
and may refresh his memory from notes.
Yes, newspapers.
But he shall not quote from newspapers unless he adopts them. So when it comes to newspapers, he must adopt. Now,
Right.
earlier I've allowed the reports from Transparency International to be referred to on those documents because I don't consider them newspapers.
Right.
But when it comes to newspapers, and we know newspapers could, well, let me leave that.
Sorry. I agree with you, Mr. Speaker. You are correct. It says newspapers.
Yeah.
I think the clarity I'm seeking is because the Prime Minister is reading a report from a foreign government into the rules of Parliament, whether he is making that, he's adopting that, I mean, a part of his presentation, Speaker.
He doesn't have to according to the rules.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, I think you were asking me about the contract, eh?
Oh, boy.
Obviously, they're listening.
Oh, boy. That's past it, Mr.
This is a contract. Employment agreement. Mr. Speaker, what is strange about this contract, and look at it. What is strange about this contract? Standard contract. But I've never seen it before. They added an addendum to the contract. Now, what is this? What is strange? Let me read, Mr. Speaker. This deed is made this 20th day of April 2017 AD, just a few days after my birthday. Is supplemented to a contract of employment dated the 7th day of January 2013, made between, I'm not going to go into all that, okay, who shall collectively be known herein as the parties. Now let me get to the point you want to raise. At will employee, employer shall employ employee in the capacity set forth above, commencing the 2nd of January, so you went back now, 2013, and continuing, now listen carefully now, with no fixed termination date. It's here. This is the contract. Hold on. Until either party shall give proper notice of termination of this employer agreement to the other, this notice shall be no less than 3 years' notice. You give 3-year notice for a contract? That's normal?
Normal bill.
That's normal?
That's not
Tell
normal.
me if that's normal.
That's not normal.
Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Cat Island, Rumpke, in San Salvador.
First of all, the member for Kalani spoke about a lifetime contract. And clearly, there's nothing he read that supports that first assertion. The second, that does not confirm that assertion for a lifetime contract. It does have a termination clause, which in itself speaks to the fact that it's not lifetime. Right, so that's, no, it may be, no, I'm not, it is.
I talk in the North Africa, man.
Mr. Speaker, I accept that a termination period of 3 years may not be a normal termination period, right? But one has to understand the circumstances under which that term was agreed. We don't appreciate it, but I can tell you this, right? With with victorious justice being exerted by the government, and on hindsight, I now could opine that it's probably a good thing, because to have the 3-year termination clause, because we see what happened. The lady would have been, the person in question would have been terminated summarily, as have been so many, like Holly Pierce and Daniel Gibson in Eleuthera. Hopefully, the contract there should have been had the 3-year termination period. With y'all in coming in power, yes.
Evidence of corruption.
Yes, but and I must say it's no evidence of corruption at all. He's trying to tie the corruption. Because that's not a question.
Allow me to give another example. I can explain all those things. We can get one next week. We can get but let me get to one more contract. I have to go. I had not reviewed this one for a while. But and you tell me if it's normal again. Yeah.
Like the last one.
A contract being terminated, contract coming to an end in May of this year, 2018. We're in 2018 now. Yeah, coming to an end in 2018. But April of 2017, you renew the contract. April of 2017 to take it through to 2020. That's normal too. Now, if you want the evidence for that contract, I know they're listening. Travel. I'm asking my aides, if you want the evidence, go to my Cable Beach office. The second drawer on the left. It's the third file. It's in this color envelope.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island, Rumpke in San Salvador.
Mr. Speaker, we could do the same thing with a number of contracts that have since been issued by this government. But we'll leave that for now. But the question is never whether it's usual or not. The question of whether it's lawful. And we say those contracts were issued lawfully.
So it's okay.
Yes, because it's lawful. It's okay because it's lawful, yes.
Yeah, I know. Contract are lawful. Are you telling me? Now, let the Bahamian people answer this, not you. I'm sticking to my script.
Yes. They taking you away from
in the year, election is 2022. In the year 2021, I can issue all F&M's contracts like this and say there's a 25-year notice clause. That's normal.
So, for example, Mr. Speaker, was it corrupt? Was it a corrupt transaction? Was it a corrupt transaction? And yes, the Bahamian people could know when it was put into a contract that if you interfere with this contract or you decide to roll this contract back, you will have to pay, the Bahamian people have to pay $100 million, as was done with the sale of Patelco, right? As was as was the contract with Patelco when he sat around the table, the Prime Minister sat around the table. Was that lawful, or was that, or did that smack of corruption?
I think they are enough fun. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, but Mr. Speaker,
that's his people.
Honorable members, the member for Kalani wants to proceed.
That's right. Let me say, I'm having fun. Let me say for the record, that I am not a rogue Prime Minister, and I will not give all the FNMs in 2020 a contract with a 25-year clause. I won't do it. Even though you say that's a contract. What that would do, that would break down democracy. That would disturb democracy. I'm a Democrat. The FNM is a Democratic party. That's the point. Mr. Speaker, the PLP seemed to burn through public funds through waste and questionable use of public funds, including taxes derived from VAT. It is this government that has reined in spending. It is this government that is being accountable for public funds, including, and I know you want to hear this one, travel expenses by government ministers, including prime ministers. So yes, I'll table mine soon. And yes, you say I took a big contingent, but we went 2 days previously to Caracas because we had a high-level meeting, which meant I took 2 in 1. So when you go to 1. I go to 2.
1 ticket.
2 to 1. But that'll be explained. The repeated promises by the former Minister of Finance to report on the funding of certain travels didn't happen. But this government is different. We have and will continue to continue to report on travel expenses by ministers, including Prime Minister. Under the former government, there were a host of questionable contracts at a number of government corporations, a number of which are being investigated, including the great water and sewage. Stay tuned. One of the daily newspapers previously reported on a forensic report conducted by Ernst & Young into operations of Bahamas Power and Light during the former government. The Daily reported, Ernst & Young said it found weaknesses in the vendor due diligence process and 19 vendors for whom the required due diligence was not performed. The requirements for vendor due diligence are not documented in current procurement policy. From our review of vendor files, we confirm that there is no requirement for procurement staff to confirm if vendors are politically exposed persons, that is PEPs, are owned by public officials, have criminal backgrounds, previous negative press coverage, or relationships to staff and or directors of DEC. Further went on, Ernst & Young found that for 19 out of 35 vendors selected for testing, no due diligence documentation could be obtained. Further went on, no information on ownership could be obtained from these workers, along with no confirmation of valid business license or a tax registration. Ernst & Young identified 3 vendors owned by PEPs or public officials who had contracts with BEC BPL. With the former government, I know you don't like this word, with the former government, it would appear, so I'm taking the safe road now, it would appear that corruption was the order of the day. No. I gave my word there. I gave my word there. I said it appeared. I gave my word. I was very careful with that selection. Huh? My brother? I'm a pep. My kids are pep.
That doesn't mean your brother is.
Yeah, they're pep. So what's the point?
No.
You want me to report here in the drawer, you know? Anyhow.
Get it for him.
The PLP was well known, Mr. Speaker. The PLP was well known for failing to table heads of agreement in the House of Assembly. But the FNM is different. So at the end, I will table this. So Travis, it's your day.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Not that Travis, that Travis.
Yeah,
This government, not this Travis. This government is different. We are committed to tabling heads of agreement. My government will continue with forensic audits in order to identify wrongdoings and to stop such practices in the future. We cannot simply ignore the massive abuse of public funds, as some opposition members may seem to do. The Bahamian people elected this government to vigorously address the culture of corruption, and we will continue to fulfill that mandate. I read an article that stated, I quote, "You can have the best rules, the best anti-corruption agency, but if your politicians are corrupt, nothing is going to save the system."
Engelson agrees with you.
Political will is needed in order to address and stem corruption. And this government, and this Prime Minister have the political will, the desire, the energy, the determination, the zest, and the drive to stop corruption. We will promote law and order. We will seek to better protect the Bahamas from national security threats, both foreign and domestic, including international criminal networks. Mr. Speaker, one of a government's most solemn obligations is the protection of citizens from a host of national security threats, both internal and external. Global criminal networks have become more sophisticated in laundering money and using means such as the dark web to pursue a variety of illicit trades such as human trafficking, terrorism financing, and the trade of illicit and dangerous arms. It is essential, Mr. Speaker, that we update our national laws as a part of a concerted global effort to address such threats, which can only be combated through international cooperation. Just as we are updating laws related to the financial services industry, we will also update other legislation necessary to protect our economic and national security. The Ministry of National Security, and I must say, my minister here is doing an excellent job. Yes. Doing an excellent job. Yes. The Ministry of National Security continues to boost its capacity for cross-border cooperation to address criminal activities which may threaten our security. Mr. Speaker, Kalani certainly supports this legislation, and I want to table this document. David?
Order that the document be brought up.
That's the heads of agreement for the Oban.
Order that the document lie on the table. As many? That's it. Somebody else there? Please. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act for the repeal and replacement of the Financial Transactions Reporting Act and for matters connected thereto. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for a second time and committed.
Bill for an act replace the Financial Transaction Reporting Act and for matters connected thereto.
For the second reading of bills.
So, I move that the Proceedings of Crime Bill 2018 be read a second time and committed.
Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to consolidate and strengthen measures to recover the proceeds and instrumentalities of crime to combat identified risks. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read a second time and committed.
A bill for an act to consolidate and strengthen measures to recover the proceeds and instrumentalities of crime and to combat identified risks.
For the second reading? None? Yes. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Southern Shores.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do resolve itself into a committee of the whole. Beg your pardon?
Yes, we did vote.
We did that. We can do in the committee stage. Oh, okay. I move that the House do resolve itself into committee of the whole with the Deputy Speaker in the chair.
Second. It has been moved and seconded that the House resolve itself into a committee of the whole House with the Deputy Speaker and Chairman of the Committee of the whole House in the chair. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The Deputy Speaker will now take the chair.
Committee of the Whole. Chair recognizes the member for Southern Shores.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to move that the long title of the Financial Transaction Reporting Bill 2018 be agreed.
It's been moved and seconded that the long title of the bill be agreed. As many that are in favor will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The long title of the bill is agreed.
And I move that clause 1 be agreed.
It's been moved and seconded that clause 1 of the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor will remain. The chair recognizes the member for Yamakro.
Mr. Speaker, I move that. Mr. Speaker, I would like to move the following amendment to clause 2 of the bill. amendment to be made, insert the following definition in the appropriate alphabetical order.
Can you restate the bill?
This is oh, you financial? Okay, okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Clause 1.
Which bill, member?
Financial Transaction Reporting Bill 2018.
You got that, Allen?
Clause 1. In subclause 3, delete the words 3, subsection 1B 2, and substitute the words 3, 1B 1. I, Roman numeral.
The seconder?
Second.
It's being moved that amendments be made to clause 1 as read. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The amendment is agreed.
Mr. Speaker, I move that clause 2 be agreed.
It's being moved and seconded that clause 2 of the bill be agreed. Those are in favor will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. Clause 2 of the bill is agreed.
Clause 2, Mr. Speaker, reads as follows. In subsection 1, delete the definition.
One second, Yamakura. You're moving an amendment to clause 2.
2, yes. And that's clause 2 of the financial transaction.
Yes. Yes.
It reads as follows. In subclause 1, delete the definition beneficial owner and substitute the following. Beneficial owner means A, natural person who ultimately owns or controls a facility holder. B, the natural person on whose behalf a transaction is being conducted. C, a natural person who exercises ultimate effective control over a legal person or legal arrangement. And D, where no natural person is identified under subparagraph A, B, or C, the identity of the natural person who holds the position of senior managing official.
Second.
As many as favor of the amendment as read will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The clause is amended as read.
I move that.
Chair recognizes the members for Cat Island, Ramkeen, Salvador.
Mr. Chairman, I did point out to the member for Yamakra that there may be an omission or an incomplete definition for the word transaction. And I don't know whether you want to deal with that with the slip rule or because I gather this is going to be, you all are scheduling to debate it in the Senate tomorrow, so as to accommodate, or whether you're going to leave this in committee, but it is that particular definition. Okay, very well. Okay. Member for Yamakra, one or two things that they may want to look at. Yeah.
That's been, that's clear. It's been moved and seconded that the amendments to clause 2 be agreed. As many members are in favor will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The amendments as read for clause 2 is agreed. As many.
I move that clause 3 be agreed.
Been moved and seconded that clause 3 of the bill be agreed. As many members are in favor will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. Clause 3 of the bill is agreed.
Oh, we have an amendment.
Sorry. Well, sorry, Yamakura. Member for Yamakura.
Clause 3, Mr. Speaker.
You're moving an amendment?
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to read it right now. A, in subparagraph 1B, delete the paragraph 2 in Roman numerals, II, and 3, and substitute as follows. 2 being Roman numerals, insurance business as defined in Section 2 of the External Insurance Act, Chapter 348, or 3, such other insurance business as the minister may designate by notice in the Gazette after consultation with the IRF Steering Committee established under Section 5 of the Proceedings of Crime Act 2018. B, in subclause 1H4, delete the words general insurance.
It's been moved and seconded that the amendment as read in clause 3 be accepted. As many members are in favor, the amendment will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. Clause 3 as read, as amended, is agreed. As many.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to move that clause 4 be agreed.
Being moved and seconded that clause 4 of the bill be agreed. The chair recognizes the member for Yamakura.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to move the following amendment to clause 4. It reads as follows. Delete paragraph A and substitute the following. A, real estate agents and brokers, when they are involved as real estate brokers in financial transactions for their clients concerning the buying or selling of real estate, and with respect to both the vendors and purchasers.
It's being moved and seconded that clause 4 of the bill be amended as read. As many members are in favor, will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. Clause 4 as amended is agreed. As many.
Move that clause 5. Each of them, there's one for each of them. There's an amendment. Move that 5 and 6, clause 5 and 6 be agreed.
It's been moved and seconded that clause 5 and 6 of the bill be agreed. As many in favor, the chair recognizes the member for Yamakura.
In subclause 5B, delete the words purchases and substitute the word purchasers.
Being moved and seconded that clause 5 bill be amended as read. Many members are in favor, will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. Clause 5 of the bill is amended as read. Let's close it.
Clause 5 and 6.
Oh, sorry.
Clause 5 and 6.
Being moved and seconded that clause 5 and 6 of the bill be amended as read. Many members are in favor of the amendment. Rise. Those opposing will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. Clause 5 and 6 of the bill is agreed as amended.
Mr. Chair, I move that clause 7, 8 be agreed. 7 and 8. 7, 8, and 9. Because we made the amendment to 9.
Being moved and seconded. Chair recognizes the member for Yamakura.
Thank you. Okay. A, delete subclause 2B. Okay.
Section 8, Yamakura. Section 8.
I move an amendment to section 9. To clause 9. Thank you.
Mimic. Seconder?
Second.
Just to read it, to read the amendment.
The delete subclause 2B2 and substitute the following. 2 is subject to AML or CFT obligations is under supervision for compliance with these obligations, and it has adequate procedures for compliance with customer due diligence and record-keeping requirements. And B, insert immediately after subclause 5 the following new paragraph. 6, a financial institution or designated non-financial business and profession shall report to the IRF Steering Committee where there has been persistent regulatory failure in respect of the identified risk framework or recognized weak compliance with international customer due diligence requirements by any jurisdiction or foreign financial institution.
It's been moved and seconded that clause 7, 8, and 9 as amended be agreed. As many as in favor rise will be seated, and those opposing will rise. Clause 7, 8, and 9 as amended being agreed. Chair recognizes the member for Southern Shores.
Mr. Chair, I move that clause 10 through 13 be agreed.
Being moved and seconded that clause 10 through 13 be agreed. Chair recognizes the member for Yama.
Move an amendment to clause 13 to be read as follows. In subclause 1, delete the words as established under subsection 5 of the Proceeds of Crime Act or the financial institution, and such enhanced measures shall be effective.
It's being moved and seconded that clause 10 and 13 as amended be agreed. As many that are in favor will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. Clause 10 and 13 as amended is agreed. Chair recognizes the member for Southern Shores.
Mr. Chair, I move that clause 14 through 60 be
The chair recognizes the member for Cat Island, Ramkins, and Salvador.
That's in respect to the former, amendment. You might need to 13. So you saw it, so I wouldn't point it out, but it needs to be clarified that since we're going to leave it in committee, I'll just point out later on.
Chair recognizes the member for Finance.
The intention is to go through this bill, leave the two bills in committee stage while we can review the points that have been raised by the members of the committee and come back with to it at a later stage.
As many. Chair recognizes the member for Southern Shores.
Chair, I move that clause 14 through 60 be agreed. 60. Not that, no, that's not.
It's been moved and seconded that clause 14 through 60 be agreed. Amen. Many that are in favor will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. Clause 14 through 60 is agreed. The member for Southern Shores.
Mr. Chair, I move that the first schedule be agreed.
Southern Shores.
First and second schedule be agreed.
It's been moved and seconded that the first and second schedule of the bill be agreed. As many members are in favor, will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. Clause 1 and the first and second schedule of the bill is agreed. No.
Mr. Chair, I now move that the bill in its entirety as amended be agreed.
It's being moved and seconded that the bill in its entirety as amended be agreed. As many members are in favor, will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The bill in its entirety as amended is agreed.
Mr. Speaker, I now move that Mr. Deputy,
Chairman.
I now move that, Mr. Chairman, I now move that the Speaker takes the chair.
It's being moved and seconded that the Speaker now do take the chair. As many that are in favor will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The Speaker will now take the chair. Yeah. Speaker, I beg leave to report that the Committee of the Whole has made progress and beg leave to sit again.
Honorable members,
from Kalani can lay the report that he relied upon in support of his contribution, which he referred to and seemed to have supported. If he could lay that in the Parliament from the United States of America, was the State Department, if he could lay that on the floor of the Parliament, of the table of the Parliament, please, Mr. Speaker, because he referred to it. Would you? Would you? No, I'm saying, but I want the record to reflect that it was part of his debate. Speaker, the only other concern I have is that I wasn't sure what the member did. Rule 33:17, and 16 says a member shall not use offensive, abusive, or insulting words about either House of Parliament or any member thereof. And I just want to make sure the references by the member to me, and this is other members have done this, Mr. Speaker. So I want to establish what the rules say. I'm wondering whether he withdrew it. If not, I'm asking that you. I want to make sure it was withdrawn. Okay. And I want to draw that attention of this rule to the House. It's not permitted that members speak about each other in such ways, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, it has been reported by the Deputy Speaker and Chairman of the Committee of the Whole House that the Committee of the Whole has made progress and would beg leave to sit again. Third reading and passing of bills. Consideration of Senate amendments. Resolutions. Member statement. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Pine Ridge.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker. I'd be remiss if we were to close out and I did not take this opportunity to congratulate the Tabernacle Baptist School for winning the Hugh Campbell basketball tournament. Tabernacle Baptist is in the Pine Ridge constituency, and I can congratulate them conscientiously, knowing them that I supported them as the Member of Parliament in every which way that I could have. And so I am happy to report, and now that Pine Ridge was there to assist in the victory, we should also be there to assist in the celebration. And so once again, we want to commend Hugh, the Tabernacle Baptist School, for a job well done. Pine Ridge is proud of you, and indeed Grand Bahama is indeed proud of you, Hugh Campbell. Also, I'd like to take this opportunity to also give my sympathies to Lady Laurie Miller, the family of Lady Laurie Miller, the widow of the late Sir Albert Miller. We want the family to know that our prayers are with them and for them during this time, and also to Sir Derwent Knowles, his family, and particularly Mrs. Charlotte Aubrey, and all the other members of the family, brother and other sister, but particularly her for me because I know her in a more personal way. And so Bahamians are proud of the legacy of Sir Derwent. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank Sir Derwent for stepping up and speaking to some of the ills and atrocities of the past that were done from a racial perspective. It took a lot of man for him to be able to do so, and a lot of concern for him to recognize that he felt that there was some wrong that was done to the Bahamian people in the time of the early 60s, 40s, and 50s. And so Sir Durwood was a man in every sense of the word, and he will be missed. He has contributed dearly to many organizations in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. We thank him for his life, his legacy, and even in his death, may we continue to celebrate him as a person who have contributed greatly to the Bahamian society. And I do say that he should also now be added as one of the heroes of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you.
Thank you. Further member statements? Appointment of select committees. Instructions to select committees. Notices for future meetings.
Speaker, I rise to renew all notices in the name of the members of the government.
Thank you, Honourable Member for Southern Shores. Opposition? The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Mr. Speaker, wish to renew all notices in the name of the opposition.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Adjournment. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Southern Shores.
I move that the House do adjourn until 10 a.m. on Wednesday, the 7th of March, 2018.
That's the 7th?
That's the 7th. It's Wednesday.
It has been moved and seconded that the House adjourn to 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 7th of March, 2018. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will rise. Final adjournment. This House stands adjourned to 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 7th of March, 2018.